He said he wasn't a member of a gang. And then they looked, and on his knuckles, he had MS-13.
There's a dispute
over that. Wait a minute. He had MS-13 on his knuckles tattooed.
Oh, he had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
He did not have the letter MS-13.
It says MS-13.
That was Photoshopped. So let me
That was Photoshopped. Terry, you can't do that. Hey, they're giving you the big break of a lifetime. You know, you're doing the interview. I picked you because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay. I picked you, Terry. But you're not being very nice. He had MS-13 tattooed.
Right, we'll agree to disagree. I want to move on to something else.
Terry, do you want me to show you the picture?
I saw the picture.
And you think it was Photoshop? Well,
here we go.
Don't Photoshop it. Go look at his hand. He had MS-13.
He did have tattoos that can be interpreted that way. I'm not an expert on them. I want to turn to Ukraine, sir.
Terry,
I want to get to Ukraine.
No. He had MS, as clear as you can be, not interpreted. This is why people no longer believe the news, because
when
it's
he was
fake
photographed
news.
in El Salvador, they aren't there. But let's just go. They aren't there when he's in El Salvador.
They weren't there, but they're there now, right?
No,
but they're
in your picture.
Terry,
Ukraine, sir.
He's got MS-13 on his knuckles.
All right.
Okay?
Well, we'll take a look at that.
You do such a disservice.
We'll take a look at that,
Why don't you just say, yes, he does, and...
It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Wednesday, April 30th, 2025. Quite the opening video. I mean, I'm actually, when I saw that yesterday late, I was mad actually because we could have talked about it yesterday, but I'm glad I get to give it more attention because it's not, excuse me, something in my mouth. It's not probably dog hair. It's not something that really changes. It's a small part of the story. It's actually really incredible how insane it is to see somebody who is doubling down on something that is clearly not true in such a high level of power around something that is being used to argue we know for sure that he's MS-13. When that first came out, we talked about it right when it came out, and I said, that can't be. He definitely doesn't think that's really there. Like, I can't believe I actually gave him the benefit of the doubt. Now, whether he's being dishonest or he actually doesn't know that those aren't on his hand. The crazy part about this is the way it's kind of cascading through the conversation as always. Now, we're going to have a couple quick points before we get to that part early in the show. But just to say before we get to it from that clip, the reality of this is that he has tattoos on his knuckles. Nowhere is it the letter M, the letter S, or the 1 or a 3. That's not the reality. Now, that picture was shown because somebody gave that to Trump and it was shown in his office. Now, I said at the time, he's clearly just saying that that's what they stand for. It was such an obvious photoshopped typed letter thing. It was very strange. And now you can very clearly see that he pushed back. No, not interpreted. MS, like there's no way to misunderstand what he's doing. And despite that, you're getting people who are claiming that he's right, that are just doubling down on him saying that as if that is the reality, even though you could prove it's not, as I showed with the pictures before and after, as well as the fact that on another side of it, there's another edge of the conversation in his support base that are saying he never actually said that. No, you're just being the fake news and you're claiming he meant, and he really just meant the tattoos mean that. No, you can very clearly see what he says. And so it's, again, this weird exercise in futility, or just this experiment in how, what's the right word for it? Just how easy it is to manipulate people using social media, using, news, whatever you want to call it that. But there's something to, it goes beyond just propaganda. This is something that is creating this kind of tribalist idea, this superseding everything kind of concept. And it's not new, but it's really pronounced right now. But I wanted you guys to see that at the gate. We're going to go over that as well as the new information around this. And really the important part, like that one idea I want to overarch the whole conversation today, which is that, and it's not left or right, not unique to one side or the other, or Biden or Trump or any individual president, but the way in this country and just propaganda in general, that we're seeing this weird development beyond the nuance to where we have the same story, we just kind of perceive it differently, to where now we're getting just literally false presentations where Stephen Miller claiming that they won a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling when it was quite literally the opposite. And that's very clearly fleshed out, but there are still people that follow them that just keep arguing otherwise because that's what they were told, and they believe that over anything else because everyone else is fake news, even though there's a hell of a lot of fake information out there. It's really strange, but we see this kind of everywhere right now, whether it's, and the question is whether he's deceiving everybody or he's being deceived. And I really want you to think about that because I find it hard to believe that the way he's doing that with the kind of amount of hubris that Trump and a lot of people in that position carry, that he'd be willing to make himself look the fool just to carry out an agenda. Certainly possible. That's, I argue, more often than not what happens. But with him, I just find that hard to wrap my mind around. So the question is, who is being deceived here? Clearly, people out there falling for it, but where is that stop? With him, people behind him, and then everything else we're seeing in a large sense, like just the claims of Garcia in general, or the blatant misrepresentations and outright lies coming from ICE or the DOJ around a lot of the things they're dealing with. And again, to make sure you hear this, it's not unique to the current administration. That's the only way people can make sense of this stuff right now. But if you stand back and look at the big problem, which is why they don't do that, because it feels insurmountable. Well, if it's everybody, then we're screwed. That's kind of the way that people think. That's what Blackfield actually is. Just how clear it shows you that we're either being guided by people that have no insight. They're literally just going with what they were told by who they think they can trust, even at the highest levels of power, or we're being conditioned to accept, at face value what we're told, whether it's Twitter files, whether it's whatever the last thing the politician said that you believe in. It is everywhere right now. And that's kind of an alarming thing to think about or to see, to watch how there's an entire faction of the conversation that will continue to argue both of the things I argued or that I pointed out, even though both are provably wrong. Whether it's he actually still said that and he believes that and you're wrong, it's actually there, or he never actually said that. It's pretty terrifying. But now, other than that, we're going to get into another opening point to reiterate some things around the Pfizer conversation and Moderna and Brooke Jackson. I'll be interviewing her coming up in a week around her case that is important. And don't forget, and I'll show you again, she made the point to tell you that, and this was yesterday's show, that Trump has sided with Trump's DOJ has sided with Pfizer. And that's what she wrote. And I think that's pretty clear. And that's obviously not even new information. If you're paying attention, Stargate, everybody, it's not hard to see where this is going, but it's important to see that and understand what that really means in a larger sense. And then I think the only other point we're going to get into is a couple of small points that I think are relevant to include. Actually, what I was saying to begin here today, and I'll go into this in a second after the Pfizer part, it's the Columbus Day point. These things that are rooted in just ridiculous, complete falsities, and yet it's just because it is the culture war dynamic, the left and the right, the broflakes and the snowflakes. It's the same thing. The point is that I'll get to it when we get there. The idea that has any real bearing to American anything for that matter, it's interesting. And if you don't know what I mean by that, and you're sure as hell going to find out, what you were taught in school is not correct. And everybody literally knows that today, but it's all about the fighting the left is what that point's supposed to be. But the rest of the show today is focused on the importance of this constitutional dynamic, what's happening, people that are almost being sent to El Salvador as American citizens, yet again, people who are almost being sent there who have no criminal record, who are here legally, that just got caught the wrong place at the wrong time, many of which are already sent, happened more than once already. Nothing other than being there, and the person on record said, well, take that person anyway. There's 18-year-old kid is one example who's currently in El Salvador for being the right skin color in the wrong place at the right time for ICE. And okay, just like we said at the beginning, there are people that will hear that and go, no, that's not true, because they don't want it to be, or they can't accept that could be happening from their chosen ideologue, even though it is, and it's easy to prove. It's everywhere. And some really alarming developments. We're going to go into that topic from yesterday that we, and I'm glad I waited. There's more to add to it around the judge from, I think, Milwaukee, but others that are dealing with the same situation. Lawyers and doctors and immigration people in the field are getting sent letters from the DOJ telling them to self-deport. And then kind of them being told, oopsie, it was a mistake. Even though we're now seeing people, the ICE is going to people's doors who are involved in immigration litigation and threatening them. This is more than once. This has been pointed out. So this is not an accident. We're seeing chilling scare tactics. And I think that's what a lot of this is. A lot of it. Or the due process point, which is important, seeing as how it turns out, one of the main things of today, which we briefly touched on yesterday, that a DOJ memo from the Donald Trump administration, and really, I argue it's really no different If you look back at other examples of other emergencies or whatever else we're dealing with, always important to hear that, guys. It's not a partisan thing. This is just the current arm of this agenda. The point, though, is that the memo they put out at March 14th makes it very clear that they argue at the very least that their Alien Enemies Act gives them the ability to kick your door down because they think you might have an immigrant in there, which basically means at this point, the Constitution no longer exists in their minds if they have narrative to insert. Here's the excuse for why these things are on hold. Well, remember we said during COVID-19, well, you don't just get to say these things no longer apply because pathogen, there's not an asterisk in the Constitution. Well, that applies to everything else and you damn well know it. But now the same thing's happening. So they did it to the left, now they're doing it to the right. Always how this works. Those of us that are not trapped in that childish illusion are aware how clear it is that this is being played against itself. And I believe most people are beginning to see that. But this DOJ memo, which as somebody rightly pointed out in the chat early before we started, apparently this overshadows the constitutional law at this point. The memo from the current executive branch argues simply that they can break the law, violate the Constitution, should they argue this is necessary to fight what they manufactured this into. And I don't mean illegal immigration, because they're illegal immigrants. They should be charged with a crime. They could be deported. But what's happening is the framing of going after people who are terrorists and rapists and human traffickers, and every single one of the people they've labeled that who have been investigated, not to say that there's not some of those involved with who they sent there. But weirdly, they've never given you an example to prove that. But I wouldn't dispute it. My point is the ones we can prove are not people that were here legally, green card, and then they revoke it a day before they grab them because of an old traffic ticket from a year ago. That's an actual case. I think it was more than a year ago, the point being, and then they remove them because they're breaking the law, but they only break the law because they removed the visa based on an arbitrary charge that was already dismissed, and then kick them out of the country. No tattoos, no gang memberships, no criminal activity, but others that are here illegally, Trump can wave the hand because, well, they work at restaurants and we need them for farms. So that doesn't mean that they're also illegal or criminals just because they're here illegally. In fact, the numbers are clearly coming out showing you that most of them are not, which contradicts these narratives, but that they're just here illegally. So the point is that you're removing people who are here legally, who actually have jobs and going to school, and yet allowing people that just suit your interests. It's all hypocrisy, guys. And really, those are all internal dynamics. I think this is much bigger than that. Whether it's about destroying the foundational aspects of this country for the interest of technocracy and a consolidation of power, or for a foreign government, or both those things at the same time. The evidence is clear. It's all around you if you can just pull out of the partisan game. Plenty more to talk about, but I'll leave it there to start. Let's get into this was, what did we use last time? This one. This was the show from yesterday. Trump DOJ sides with Pfizer in Brook Jackson lawsuit, and Garcia moved to prison for non-gang members, which I'll actually reiterate that briefly again because it's relevant to a new thing from today. But this ongoing kind of mission creep, if you will, around this narrative where it's like, all the things that keep falling on the wayside, and then it becomes, well, he's not the father of the year, or, well, he has a claim of domestic abuse. I don't care if he had 100,000 domestic abuse claims. That has no relevance to the claim of whether he was given due process around the allegation of being an MS-13 member when they sent him this recent time. And even before that, as I won't go over for the umpteenth time, the information is based on nothing but hearsay and a bull's hat that's been circulated around, and that was, I'll show you that part again, reiterated by the recent judge in the Supreme Court. All of this is completely flimsy, and they know that. Otherwise, they would easily produce this stuff and nail it down, but they don't. The point is that they have now moved him to another prison that is exclusively for people with not even the allegation of gang members. So it's all falling away. And all they can do is go, well, he's a bad guy for other reasons, and even those are completely up in the air. It just is insulting. It truly is, because I don't believe people in this country, or anywhere for that matter, are generally this stupid. We all have our low points and our high points, but I don't think that the average person is just this willing to be deceived or easily deceived. And I think truly it's because they're choosing to for many different reasons. There is a group out there that falls for just about anything, but I argue that most people out there are choosing to because of politics or because they think they should, or, on and on and on. But on the Pfizer side of this, Brook Jackson, again, this is from Yet 28, said Trump sides with Pfizer. The DOJ explained to the court that it has had continued access to Pfizer vaccine trial data, which we don't, apparently. So they're saying that we've been looking this whole time, even though we know that nothing has changed in regard to what we already saw and the continuation of less information is not going to change the years that you can clearly see. They are killing people, and they're still supporting these things. Even especially the Trump administration, rolling out Stargate, an mRNA platform, rolling forward Moderna shots and Moderna platforms. And it says, and the vaccine is effective. So the DOJ from Trump's administration, along with rolling out MMR vaccines and promoting the mRNA platform in general, and a lot of other things that should have already happened, or, not pulling the shots like we promised, they're telling you that the original ones are good, just like Trump's been telling you. So either 40,000 DHS, or he actually believes that, or doesn't care that he's hurting you. We'll post their legal brief later. You guys have read the same lies for years now. Nothing new to see here. Now, the reason I bring it up is just because I want you to recognize, and to reiterate that I'm going to be interviewing her next week. And we'll talk about that more in depth. Because I don't think you're going to get a really honest, in-depth discussion about this from most anybody out there in the partisan conversation. Because it's either going to be going after Trump when it's unnecessary, or pulling punches for him when it is necessary. The reality is that Brooke Jackson will break it down, as she always has in our interviews, for why this matters, regardless of who's president, and call out anybody that does not point the truth out, regardless of what side they're on. Now, Danny Rancourt adds this to something we highlighted, and this is Trump putting out the whole proximal, the origin lab leak theory point, reiterating that, and everyone going, oh my God, it just proved everything, by pointing to the same things we already saw and knew before. So why would it be now proof when before? Well, it's partisan manipulation. Whether or not you think this is true information, it's just the crowd goes along and goes, well, we did it. It's over. We won, and we did it and improved this, or whatever the thing we're supposed to be screaming, it happened. Like Bennett Johnson is just like a absolute, this is every day. And I'll actually make a point about this in a second. Where they're in this meeting and they're calling, Vance calls out the corporate media for lying. And he's like, incredible. It's like, incredible. Calling out the media for lying is incredible. Literally everybody does that every day. And it's just funny that it's about every moment is the biggest new thing. We're winning all the time. That's kind of a vehicle for that moment, that field right now. Every moment of everything they're doing is the winning golden age, changing the world constantly, even though most of it seems to be going the direction that they told you we shouldn't go in when Biden was doing it. But I said, so we're just going back to square one, huh? As the state Republicans pointed out, 1 million Americans lives lost at the hands of China's coronavirus. Are we really going back to square one with everything we can prove from how clearly they work together on whatever we're talking about? China must be held accountable. It's kind of crazy that especially the Republicans are falling for this, or choosing to ignore that it's ridiculous. Denny Ranku, which I include his interview in this, the one specifically talking about, this is the link right here, that it's an illusion, the main point, the crux of it really, and that he now later argues that it could additionally added to that is the biological stress-induced bacterial pneumonia. I recommend you check out his work. He simply says, this dangerous war propaganda is opposite of the truth. The COVID military operation was designed and executed by the U.S. deep state. So think about that for those pretending you're fighting the deep state, while you now have an example of Donald Trump's administration pointing to the basically playing for the deep state in exactly the ways you'd expect, whether they know it or not. Now, if you agree with Danny Ranku, and I do, he says the excess mortality was caused by the response, not the pathogen. So wake up, guys. They're lying to you, and that's where this goes. And so these are all points to highlight that this is not different than it was before. I'll play a brief part of this as Brooke Jackson just says, oop, and this is Donald Trump from 2023, Milk Bar TV, making a great compilation of all the times he said that this is his thing, and vaccines are good, and I'm the father of the vaccine.
In the past 9 months, my administration has initiated the single greatest mobilization in U.S. history, pioneering, developing, and manufacturing therapies and vaccines in record time.
I guess in a certain way, I'm the father of the vaccine because I was the one that pushed it. To get it done in less than 9 months was a miracle.
No medical breakthrough of this scope and magnitude has ever been achieved this rapidly, this quickly. And we're very proud of it.
Well, Fauci said it would take 3 to 5 years. He thought it was something that just wouldn't be that effective because it would take so long to get.
Would you make sure you get the president the information that a vaccine that you make and start testing in a year?
You get it. It goes on, and it's all the same things for her. I just want to point that out, that Brooke's sharing that and highlighting the fact that, it's not about left or right. She's calling out the current administration because they're doing the same thing Biden's administration was, which again, it just simply to simplify that, she's pointing out that the U.S. government is doing the same thing that the U.S. government was doing last time. That's it. And it's all part of this agenda. And I mean, it's really wild to me that we can see such obvious examples, just getting away from the term deep state, which is still a valid thing to consider in many contexts of what it means. We all think it's something different. Whoever you ask, it seems we have different opinions of it. And that's the game that played today with the manipulation of definitions like regime change, I often point out. My point is that it's weird to watch this administration rolling out exactly what anybody, like aside from the politics, you go back a couple of years and you just laid out agendas and said, what would this mean to you? Of all groups, the conservatives have been like, great reset, the deep state, and now they're doing all of it. And I still argue a lot of them, if not the majority, are calling it out, but the people at the core top of the conversation with all the influence in the reach are pointing anywhere else. And it's very strange to see. Now, Elon Musk highlights what Mario Nawfal says, his PR person, or whatever you want to call this little relationship they have. And he goes, study, 45% of COVID deaths in Athens weren't really from COVID. Oh my God. Funny how we're just rehashing like the TLAV reports from 2021. Is that what this all is? And he's just, oh my God, look, the things were, yes. Okay. As always, the same old question you get. Isn't it good? At least they're yes. Don't even finish the sentence. Yes. It's good that it's being pointed to. Yes. That's always a positive. But then are there negatives that may overshadow that positive, even though it still remains a positive? Okay. It's not all or nothing and everything, guys. The point is that this is real. And it's a newer study that's showing you the same information we were showing you all the way back then, that the majority of whatever was happening were not due from whatever they were calling COVID-19, which is like it's a amalgamous thing. It's a whole muddied conversation, because the reality is whatever we're calling that could be the mix of flu and pneumonia, PCR false positives, vaccine side effects. So it becomes near impossible to nail it down to like the COVID thing versus others. But the reality is you can clearly show many ways around that all of these things were not actually what they were pointing to. And for a long time now. But then Elon goes way more than 45. Oh, what a truth-telling bombshell. He's the real guy right there, because he's, 4 years too late. Now, still good to point it out. My point, though, is that this is happening now while they're rolling out an mRNA platform for cancer and 4 or 5 other things they're including, while they're still pushing COVID shots, despite the floated idea that they may pull them off the child schedule. Hey, if it happens, I'll cheer it on. Hasn't happened yet. And all the different examples of keeping the same childhood schedule, pushing MMR shots. Come on, guys. It's just insane to think this is actually anything other than placation. I hope it's not. But I said, yep. And agreeing that it was way more and that this was not COVID what that caused this. But I said, yep, it was the mRNA injections that you all still support. And you are rolling out even more using AI right now. When will that breaking report be coming out, Mario Nawfal? Of course it won't. Then, of course, Brooke highlights another development, which is interesting. For the first time in judicial history, an appellate court, Fifth Circuit, has effectively held that hospital execs, not the FDA, CDC, or HHS, will determine a drug's classification and market conditions, stripping the Secretary Kennedy Jr. of his constitutional authorities. Very interesting. Now, to be clear, before I'm going to circle back to this in more detail when about this in particular, because I find this fascinating. But remember, this is an appellate court ruling that doesn't necessarily change like the legal realities of who's in control of these, basically the HHS being able to dictate these things down to the other health agencies in certain circumstances. But this has set a legal precedent, which is really interesting. Now, the question is, how do you perceive that? Do you perceive that as the deep state, otherwise in this case, the judicial system, trying to stop RFK from doing what they think or what people think he should be doing? That certainly does appear that way in an interesting way. This, first of all, to put it this way, having them argue that they can dictate what these things are, I disagree with flatly. But what's interesting to me, that from my perspective, as you know, that I see these people as the government, not necessarily. No, look, there's different branches and they don't have the same opinion. My point, though, is that these things are largely cultivated, in my opinion. And the idea is you're creating a circumstance where you're saying his hands are tied. Okay, maybe that's not the reality. Maybe that's a way to make it seem like he's trying and can't get it done, which is very common. Or another way to look at it, and these are all possibilities, that's happening because the Trump administration doesn't want him to do the things that he says he wants to do, which actually stands out to me as a lot more possible because of how many things we've already seen. I mean, immediate shifts from him saying things right before this and now them doing something completely different, or having him get hamstrung with the people around him from Trump putting them there. We've seen a lot of these examples. So either way, just to make that quick, I found that interesting. And what Brooke says is simply when the Constitution takes a back seat. Now think about this in the larger context of everything happening today. Your private employer can mandate it, experimental or not. If you refuse, you have no right to object and you can be fired, even though federal law says you have an option to refuse. So obviously that's just about the shot dynamic, but realizing that in any context, when the Constitution takes a back seat, they can do whatever they want. Doesn't mean the Constitution goes away. That means they're ignoring your inherent rights. But it's important to think about all this. Now, that will be relevant in a second more because of where this goes. But think about how that makes sense. And really, just remember, a precedent, not necessarily changing anything on record or really saying that when another situation comes to pass where there's a dispute between who gets to decide, this will be pointed to. So it's interesting. Now, before we come back to that in general, I want to reiterate something that has been going around. This is from July 2nd. Now, I would also want to add that I've mixed the dates up on these things in the past, just kind of referencing them off the top of my head. January 17th was for this discussion, which I'll show you in a second. This one was July 2nd, 2024. HHS provides $176 million to develop pandemic influenza mRNA-based vaccine, which, yes, is still happening. I'll show you that in a second. Even though it's July 2nd, the point is, as of right now, if they wanted to stop this, they could absolutely stop this. Maybe they could lose some money, right? But they could fully stop this as of right now, and it wouldn't go forward. Very clear. And I'll show you even Grok telling you that. But the other one, which is then the one from January 17th, 3 days before Trump took office, they added even more. It provides $590 million to accelerate pandemic influenza mRNA-based vaccine development and enhance platform capability for other diseases. That's what they're working on with Stargate. That's why another reason why this is also still continuing. So realize that we're talking about almost $800 million to going to Moderna for exactly what we were told they were going to stop. And yet then you get the typical, oh, well, it was Biden and they're not allowed to stop it now. Yeah, they actually are legally in every other way able to stop this entirely. But it's funny how you get the argument in other contexts that this apparently King Trump can do whatever he wants because he's the president and the mandate and all that, except this one, his hands are tied. Too late. It's just whatever makes sense for you to not acknowledge that this is what, anything you can do to make it not the person's fault. Right? Or Twitter censoring people, and now they're all blaming Yacarino. It's like, well, obviously, we told you that, World Economic Forum Yacarino, but to just pretend that Musk isn't the person, or in any other context, it's all like with Brooks' case. Barnes saying it's a holdover Democrat from the DOJ. Well, I'd like to see evidence for that, and if it's the case, then put them in jail. But otherwise, it seems like an easy way to just assume that it isn't the person that we all know it is. But the point about these two things is they are continuing. There were some reports going around pointing to this as if it was a new story. It's not. These are all from before, but the reality is that they could stop these, and this is the major direction it is all going in. So just keep that in mind. And it is all about it's all about bird flu. Now, I ask Grok, it's important, the same way I always tell you I'm asking, because I want people to see it from the perspective they think is the trustworthy one, even though we should doubt all of them, especially ones being put together by DARPA. After HHS provided $176 million to develop pandemic influenza mRNA-based vaccines. And even right here, I said January 17th, and technically the 176 was earlier. It picks up on that, and you'll see what has been done with that money. I wanted to see what it said. Now, it says the $176 million provided by the U.S., the HHS, by HHS to Moderna, and it does say July 2nd, just so you can see it corrects that, was aimed at accelerating the development of what we just talked about, influenza mRNA-based vaccines, specifically bird flu. Now, Moderna has been leveraging the funds to support the development of mRNA 1018, just like mRNA 1273, I think. And that was the COVID vaccine. Just showing you that this is the same thing. Like, I shouldn't need to make that obvious, it's the same lettering, but just for people that haven't connected the dots, this is the extension of what Moderna was doing during COVID-19. And it's happening now through the Trump administration. If that hasn't yet been, you haven't grasped that yet. And it says, which targets different strains of bird flu. And it says right now, the funding that they gave is continuing through the phase 1 and 2 clinical studies. And they could easily stop this right now, should they want to, which is, I ask right here. Oh, wait. Oh, it's down there. I ask it secondly. So the funds are supporting the preparations to advance mRNA 1018. So when that comes to pass, hopefully not, but clearly it's going to. And the Trump administration puts that forward. Remember that they could have stopped it. And it's expected to begin the trials this year. And it says the award is being used to leverage Moderna's existing U.S. domestic large-scale commercial mRNA manufacturing platforms originally for COVID-19. You see the point? That's what Stargate is doing. This ensures the capability for rapid scale in response to public threats. The funding supports this establishment and additional pandemic influenza vaccine response capabilities. Oh, good. So the funding not only helps build this, but other pandemic response, which we all know what those mean. Allowing Moderna to quickly adapt mRNA platform to target various disease. Oh, so exactly like we were worrying about. The Moderna plug and play platform, like literally from the Moderna point, we always knew it would come back to. That is the operating system, which is your body. These are their terms. And then plug and play, which means they can just trade in different antigens, or in many cases, arguing that they could do that internally in your body. All these things are happening. Now it says HHS secured a fair pricing agreement with Moderna as part of the award to ensure equitable access to vaccines. Funny how these buzzwords. This is the Trump administration. Now it says it's worth clarifying that on January 17th, it awarded another $590 million to Moderna to further accelerate the mRNA-based influenza development, the vaccine. And it says that this later funding builds on the 176. As of April 30th, today, the 176 has been primarily used to advance these trials. Just make that clear. Now, I asked if the Trump admin wanted to stop this. Are they able to? Very simple. Now, there's definitely more information about other legal nuances around, like I talked about, like whether they've already begun the project and money's been committed, but that's not the same point of whether they can stop it and lose that money. Right. So the reality is, as it says, the Trump administration has the authority to review, modify, and potentially terminate that contract. Simple. And this is specifically for mRNA vaccines. The subsequent 590 awarded on January 17th as well. However, their ability to stop these contracts outright depends on several legal contractual practical factors. Below is the analysis, and you can read it for yourself. It's exactly what I'm talking about. The bottom line is they can end the process of this, end the production of it, obviously, but they're committed in some cases to what they might have already put forward or what they might have already used or blah, blah, blah. But bottom line, they have the authority to review, modify, or potentially terminate this contract. And it's not. They're continuing the same contract. And on top of that, which, by the way, just means more mRNA bird flu injections and platforms and all the stuff that we all knew was coming. This is a new contract for HHS with, how do you say that? Seqirus, Seqirus, Inc., that goes until apparently potential end date January 31st, 2034. For the construction of vaccine manufacturing facilities. $2.1 billion, not a small project. And just since the second, on my birthday, in fact, they gave another $110,000 from Trump's administration. So it's still going. A program started back well before Donald Trump even. 2009 this started, right? And so it's continued through multiple left and right administrations, building vaccine manufacturing facilities, right? So this is a long-term agenda that they're continuing. That's the point to really understand. Now, Jeffrey Tucker addresses a big question going around. It says, every day I get calls from people, not activists, but normal people, who ask the same question. Why? With RFK and the others in power, have these mRNA shots not been pulled? Very simple. He says, I really don't have an answer. I assume it's something that has to do with big pharma hegemony. Really, man? Like, I mean, that's certainly possible, right? But how do we not immediately go? It's also just as likely that they're not what they promised they would do, or not what they're not who they said they were. They're not doing what they promised they would. That is the most obvious example here. I mean, it's not just one thing. It's not just the shot. It is MMR. I mean, we've gone over many different examples. It's all of these different events that challenge everything they've always claimed they believe in. Well, in particular, RFK Jr. But as Sasha Latipova says, respectfully, Jeffrey Tucker, it is not a pharma issue, albeit pharma in this case is acting as part of the Department of War, not defense explicitly. You know why? COVID is a classified national security military campaign. And clearly, RFK Jr. is being a head of a civilian health agency, cannot terminate the deployment of military weapons. Now, if you agree with that, and it makes a lot of sense to me, maybe that's why they can't cancel the other ones either. Maybe they're not even able to, which then you should be asking who's actually in charge of that or everything else. And Jeffrey says, yes, this seems absolutely correct. Incredibly, it's not his domain. Think about that, guys. Now, I'll include our interview with Sasha Latipova, how Pfizer and the Department of Defense defrauded the public. It's a great interview, as well as the Stargate discussion that Derek put out. Trump's partners with technocrats to promote mRNA injections, AI, and transhumanism. So it's important just to see how all that ties together still. It's all very clear. And how we can pretend that it's not very obvious that they're not doing what was promised. I mean, I see a post every 30 seconds. Promises made, promises kept. And usually pretty flimsy things on the side, not the major issues. I mean, not even the immigration point has come to where are the mass deportations. Now, you may argue that that's what's happened, but it's not. In regard to what they were pointing to, that's not what actually happened. And I'm glad, because the reality would have been even more chaotic, as we'll get to in a second. Not to say that we shouldn't be removing illegal aliens, but the process is there for a reason. The government needs to prove its claims, no matter what it is doing or who it's accusing. That's the reality of why it exists. The point, though, is to see how much this continues. And just, I have my shot up there. And, and just, there's so many examples to show you that these people are not actually following through with the major examples of what they promise. But the narrative wins today over facts, apparently, in some people's minds. But on that same point, to kind of overlap this with this, I don't even, there's got to be a word for this, or a term, maybe new, maybe old, to describe this kind of, not just the culture war back and forth, but this use of completely fabricated information today. Or like just using something that's not rooted in reality and just making that an argument. It's very strange. So this one, to start that, Trump says he's bringing back Columbus Day from the ashes. Very small point. But, okay, so what does that even mean? Because the point is, from their side of it, well, the lefties were fighting that. Well, they never really went away. It was like this idea that they held it for different names. Well, if you understand the reality of this, one, he's not American, didn't exist at that time. He's Italian, Spanish, different disputes on that. Didn't discover America. Are we still pretending that's the case? Bahamas is what he found. Okay. So what does this have to do with America? It's because of the narrative we still tell ourselves, that he discovered America and we changed the world. Well, that's propaganda. It's not true. And of course, he also went on to ethnically genocide entire people. These are realities, guys. It's not disputed. You can look back, other than the political narratives, but all it comes down to is we want to pretend that what we said was the case, because the lefties, both sides are ridiculous about it, right? One side is an overreaction to the lies. One side is rooted in the false narrative, and both of them fight at that. And they want to push it back because one side, the lefties are bad, the other side, the righties are bad. That's how this works. The simple way to frame this, and this is Trump, the White House put, Christopher Columbus is so back. God, it's like they're speaking from the 90s. It's so weird. The way that they're putting themselves forward, to me, is embarrassing. Like they're trying to seem hip and cool, and they're just making themselves look stupid to anybody that's not blindly adhering to their doctrine. And that, again, if you think that's any different than sleepy, decrepit Joe Biden, then you're not paying attention. But the White House, Christopher Columbus is so back, and Trump says, I'm bringing Columbus Day back from the ashes. The Democrats, as I said, did everything possible to destroy Christopher Columbus. Okay, well, what does that have to do with anything? His reputation and all the Italians that love him so much, they tore down his statues and put up nothing but woke, or even worse. You get where this goes. I'm hereby reinstating Columbus Day. Well, I said, oh, cool. So we get an mRNA platform, MMR shots, no Epstein files, but we'll go back to pretending that an Italian-Spanish explorer discovering the Bahamas has anything to do with the United States other than culture war BS. Right. So woke right. Broflake, snowflake. It is the exact thing on the other side of the conversation. We're going to jam back in the irrelevant false story because the lefties argue that he's a, whatever. It's a back and forth culture war, both usually rooted in false information. This is insulting. It's embarrassing. The world is very aware of this information. You don't think they know that? It's all because they're trying to aim at the lowest common denominator, the people that are actually uneducated on this and believe because the American doctor story we tell ourselves is more important than the facts, that they fall for it, or people that go along with Trump because they do that no matter what. It is embarrassing to people that are actually aware of the reality, not just the point about Columbus, but this interest in just screaming the lie because the other side sucks. Like, we have been boiled down to the most juvenile politics, and I mean more than I've ever seen in my life. It's always been a bit juvenile in the way this works in this country, but today it's pretty embarrassing. Now, here's another example of that. Benny Johnson says, there it is. The way he frames it is so funny. VP Vance just asked the real question. I can tell you right now, the question is, why are you all lying media? Why are you all lying about us instead of focusing on what we want you to focus on? Is that even remotely new? I've heard that exact framing 100,000 times. Bombshell! He goes straight up, calls out the fake news. Yeah, like literally everybody all the time, man. He goes, incredible. But it says, why is the press so focused on the fake BS rather than what's going on in this country? I mean, look, that statement you could have put anywhere in the last 40 years, or maybe more accurately in the last 20 years. It's always been the reality, but people have been calling it out more. And on either side of the conversation, left or right, mainstream alternative media. I mean, it's exactly what happens literally every day, but that's how this works, right? You guys are doing the thing, even though they both do it, but they only point out half the problem. So when we call it out, the problem never stops. It's pretty simple. But then, of course, the clip is a selectively clipped thing, and I'll show you the full clip, and you can tell me if you think it changes the context. But here's what he says.
That's deployable.
Oh,
so he's asking.
That's not the one. Oh, that's the first we played. Here's the one.
Why is it that the press is so focused on the fake BS rather than what's really going on in the country? I think that what we've shown, sir, is that you can do a lot. You can do a lot in 100 days, but you've also unfortunately revealed that too much of the American media hasn't learned the lessons of the past 40 years.
And what's that lesson? That you should focus on the false news that we want to focus on? I mean, let's be clear. That's never been, this is the reality around the mainstream alternative media, the corporate media. They're always gaslighting and lying and deceiving. It's not just half the story. It's pretty embarrassingly clear to the world, at the very least, and most Americans. And so the idea is that why are you focusing on the fake news, which they are, instead of focusing on our fake news? Like what's going on in the US? I mean, what are you actually talking about? I mean, and many of the people are talking about like what he actually is referring to right there, which is why Benny Johnson slices it out, I think, because the real full picture, this isn't even the full discussion. These weird, with all their red hats, like they're, it's so stupid. The way they're all sitting around this table and acting like this is any different because they just verbalize their grief, their gripes about whatever the news said that day. Like it feels childish to me. I mean, we don't need this fake front of them sitting around the table acting like that's what happened. Just put the information out, guys. We don't need this show. But see, this is what it comes down to. So the Johnson of the world can go, he did it, incredible. We changed everything because Vance said the thing you've heard 75,000 times. But here's the bigger clip.
And let me just make one other observation because it's interesting. I've seen the data. I've monitored it. I've looked at it. But the most underreported fact of the first 100 days is that we came in with a massive recruitment shortfall. And in 100 days of Secretary Hegseth and President Trump's leadership, we now have people breaking down the doors to join our military.
Okay. So that's what he wants you to focus on, right? Not all the other stuff that we think doesn't matter. Well, they can decide for themselves what they think is important. They lie like all the media does. But the idea that, by the way, what he's citing there is actually kind of dishonest and not the full picture. But that's the idea is we want you to come out and say, we changed everything. Trump did everything in the first 100 days. I mean, I think Kate Leavitt actually called it like the most influential in any president, pulling a very bombastic Trump statement out of there, right? Typical hyperbolic statements. And I think one of the people online said, well, you might want to discuss that around the Civil War and see, it's like clearly that first 100 days is not, what they're doing is trying to create the momentum that they want to feel. In reality, you could actually call this one of the most important, but in a bad way, first 100 days, in my opinion, because they're rolling out if it happens, what will change this country irrevocably forever. That's what they're doing. So yeah, maybe they're right in a very dark way. They want you to think what they're doing is somehow changing, bringing back freedom and liberty while they're destroying all those things in rapid succession. And it's not just this; it's Biden handing up to Trump and whoever comes next. That's how this goes.
To the media assembled here, it's a really interesting question. Why has that happened? Completely aside from the fact that I think it's a good thing or I think that President Trump deserves political credit for it, why did we go from a military where people didn't want to serve to now all of a sudden they do want to serve? That's a story you guys should cover.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. And I have seen a lot of people talk about it. But are you saying we know for sure why? Look, you can point to whatever you want to point to. Both sides will always do that. It's all because of what we did. And we're the ones that changed everything, even though half the time you look back and it goes, oh, well, that actually is because of the presidents before, or the problem actually started in your first days and you blame it on the president before, or, whichever way it works. They're always doing this. But the idea is that that's actually not even this technically started, as somebody points out, before. Either way, guys, there's always these transitions. And of course, whenever you've got this massive focus on some war, with Israel or whatever's going on, you will get more people that choose to try to sign up because of their political intentions. That's one of the reasons. But again, maybe it's because they all just love the country more. I don't know. But the idea that should overshadow, I mean, why is that even newsworthy? It's noteworthy to say that's a change, but is it news? What I find more important is the ongoing warfare, the ongoing illegal actions, the ongoing, or the ongoing positive actions that have changed people's lives for the better, which are pretty nil as far as I can tell. There's few of them that have happened. The discussions around food things from RFK that are beginning, it seems. That's news. That's because there's things that have changed, not the kind of abstract idea that things have shifted a different way for the military because of what you claim. It just seems like such a lazy thing to put out.
But compared to that, how much time have you instead focused on the fact that we deported an MS-13 gang member?
Nope. Right. So even still to this point, they're still claiming that that's the case, when at best it's unproven. But the reality is the evidence, quite frankly, proves that the only thing they have is hearsay from a corrupt cop that was fired. That's it. And that he wore a bull's hat. That is the entirety of the information that then cascaded through multiple documents during deportation hearings, none of which is actual evidence of being part of MS-13, as even the judges tell you. But here he is, reiterating it yet again. And the point is, that's why this gets clipped out. Because, oh, look, you're focusing on what? The largest constitutional crisis this country seems to have ever been through, at least in living memory. You could argue that the suspension of habeas corpus from Lincoln was probably exactly the same conversation. My point, though, is that this is monumentally important. Even if you think it's the right thing, this is a major newsworthy discussion. The president bucking and ignoring Supreme Court rulings? Yeah, pshaw. What a small, useless story. Focus on how we're bettering the military. I mean, that's childish. But he continues.
With a valid deportation order, and why?
A valid deportation order. I mean, that's a flat out lie, guys. That's insane to me. You are talking about the Trump's administration in 2019 giving him the withholder of removal, which allowed him to stay. No information come to changes since then. They just decide to randomly do that now. And yes, guess what? No actual due process, because they never actually presented the evidence in front of a judge. So no, he did not. They're pointing back to the old discussions and saying because they use the Alien Enemies Act, they can just revoke the withholder of removal. The point is that requires process like every other action. They know that. They don't care. They're banking on their blind followers screaming things like the MS-13 on his knuckles, despite the obvious evidence proving they're lying to you.
Why is it that the press is so focused, deported an MS-13 gang member with a valid deportation order, and why is it that the press is so focused on the fake BS rather than what's really going on in the country? I think that
and so then you get the dynamic where what he just told you is what, that's the fake BS. So people then scream that we know those things are fake. And all it is because you look at the Democrat media. It's easy to do that. Cast the person challenging your thought as the other, the dehumanized. It's what they do. I still don't think most people are stupid enough to fall for it. But it's working for some. And look, if it's 1%, that's millions of people. It's a lot of people, guys.
What we've shown, sir, is that you can do a lot. You can do a lot in 100 days, but you've also unfortunately revealed that too much of the American media hasn't learned the lessons of the past 40 years. Whatever
they think those lessons are, right? And of course, my point is that they're all been the same for a very long time. It is an establishment-controlled structure that is constantly, even if every person within that is aware, whether or not they're aware of that. As Alison Morrow would tell you, most of them are not. That it's manufactured consent, as Noam Chomsky's pointed out in the past. The reality that that's what the whole manufacturing consent, research book and conversations around is that ultimately they wouldn't be there if they didn't already hold certain preconceived beliefs. They don't even realize that they're positioned for that, and so it's a very interesting dynamic. And so what we're seeing here is a situation where people are continuing to push these narratives for the interest of the state, for the establishment. And the back and forth false binary is how they use that. And that's how they keep it going. So the point is he's wrong and he's lying. And he's still reiterating this game, that's the only thing that matters is pointing to how bad the Democrats are. That's what these people lap up. It's incredible that he said the news is lying. No, it's because all you're trying to highlight here is that the Democrats lied to us. Everything else they say is false. Now, Big Fish highlighted the real exchange, the larger one. And this person just added, that's actually not true, though. Military signups picked up in December before those two were even in office, which is true. Now, again, I argue it's the same point. I think it's because of the Ukraine and different dynamics that we're continuing. That this is what you see when people get more reason to feel or more propaganda driven to make you more jingoistic, more patriotic. So on that note, coming from the conversation of just belligerently, really just manufacturing consent with lies. Here we're back to this clip again. So if you didn't see the opening part of this is absolutely flooring. I mean, the fact that anybody is still trying to claim that he didn't just clearly establish that this is what he thought, that now they're trying to act like we're misrepresenting it, which will become the narrative in these circles, which will challenge the factual. Like you could have a signed affidavit from Trump saying he thinks it's literally those letters, and they would still try to argue you're wrong. that you made it up or it's not true, or don't show me because if I don't see it, then I can always pretend like you lied. It's self-serving, it's willful ignorance. So I said, so it looks like I gave Trump too much credit, as he clearly thinks that this was actually the letter M, the letter S, and the number 1 and 3 tattooed on his knuckles. Not just illustrating what they assumed the actual tattoos meant. Because even that, by the way, is an assumption. And I'll go through that too. Lindsey Graham tried to make a point about it in court and in a hearing. And their chosen guy basically says that it's subjective. That's not what they're framing it as. I'll show you the article, but it's at best. I mean, guys, you realize that literally anybody could get those tattoos. Maybe even somebody that wants to be MS-13. That's assuming those tattoos even mean that, which I don't think they do. There's people with MS-13 tattooed actually on their knuckles or major MS-13s on their back. Now, yes, there are other associated things that you can argue that they tend to get, but the reality is these people don't hide their membership. It's not a secret code. Look it up. It's actually very prominent in the conversation. So what's insane to me is that we're pretending that the marijuana leaf, which clearly could mean M, and the smiley face could mean S, or it could be a death symbol with the eyes closed, but that the cross guaranteed means 1, and that somehow the skull is 3. You realize what they're saying is that the skull was tattooed over the 3. That's what they're now saying, because the guy in court tries to go, and what from here looks like a backward 3. The narrative is just fluctuating to make sense of it however they can. All it shows you is that best. That is their interpretation of it. Now, even if you think he is, and that's what that shows, that's not proof. And in a court of law, that would not stand. You'd have to have more evidence to back it up. And that has to matter to you, because otherwise the government can accuse anybody of whatever they want at any time. And they could just simply say, well, because we called them an illegal alien, that they don't get any process, even though the reality is the opposite. I mean, that's the same point to really continue to reiterate here, guys. Every time. If you're of the mind, first of all, incorrectly, that illegal aliens don't have constitutional rights, you're wrong. Over and over, you are wrong. It's easy to prove. Reno versus Flores, Supreme Court rulings over and over, the Constitution itself. I mean, everybody who has a brain who knows these things are clearly trying to tell you that. Ask Grok, it'll tell you point blank. The point is that if you're going to argue incorrectly that they don't have due process and that they can deport an alien because they can, okay, all that means is that the government can say, you're an illegal alien, whether you are or not, and you're gone. And now we're being told we can't even bring them back, right? So how will we ever find out? Well, I mean, or whether it's not a legal alien. Let's say it's somebody who is, like we've seen already, Visa card, green card, but they just go, you're an illegal alien, and deport them, and you never hear from them again. How would you ever know they're not a U.S. citizen? The point is, you would know if there was a process. Now, obviously, you could argue that there are documented people that are here illegally, but even then, the argument is that this has to be a process where you prove it. That is the reality of the Constitution. You don't get to pick and choose how it applies. But in most cases, they don't know for sure. People get picked up in circumstances, and then now we're seeing people get scooped up, and they can arbitrarily deem them all illegal aliens, which they've done. And I'm going to give you 4 cases today of people that were just barely held back from being deported, who we can now prove are simply a brown-skinned person who was at the wrong place. So again, the point is, if you're arguing that they don't have to do that, all you're doing is opening the door for them to do it to anybody they want with no process to verify that they're even correct. Or again, the largest point for people that don't believe that that's even possible, what if they're just wrong? And your argument is they don't ever have to prove anything because whatever your logic is, even though it's wrong. So that means that innocent people can be sent to wherever they want to send them because they have no process. I mean, the continual point is that's obviously why it exists, and it does. And you can prove that. So here is this clip of Donald Trump speaking, and I'll show you the images of his hand. Actually, they're clipped into the video I made. This is the one I did to open.
He said he wasn't a member of a gang. And then they looked, and on his knuckles, he had MS-13.
There's a dispute over that.
Wait a minute. He had MS-13 on his knuckles tattooed.
He had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
You know what? Hold on. I'm going to bring this in. Not that it matters for you guys. I was using the thing on the side. I'm going to bring it in as a video at the bottom because I want to be able to pause it at a certain point. But I'll let it play. Here it is again.
He wasn't a member of a gang. And then they looked, and on his knuckles, he had MS-13.
There's a dispute over that.
Wait a minute. He had MS-13 on his knuckles tattooed.
He had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
Okay, so interpreted that way. That's the first point. That's language. It's very clear. And Trump seemingly exhausted by trying to defend what is wrong, he stops him. Terry, don't do it. But the point is interpreted that way.
But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
He did not have the letter MS13.
It says MS13.
That was...
Okay, again, he says it didn't have MS13, and Trump goes, it had MS13. And for the podcast, we're zoomed in on his hand. It's not there. Wasn't there before, which is one of the images you'll see in a second, and it wasn't there after he was in El Salvador. It's not there. And the fact that we even have to go through this is wild to me. It's so obviously a Photoshop. And I don't even mean that in the sense that, for all I know, it wasn't deliberately done to deceive anybody. That it was just done to illustrate what they argued, and somehow Trump believes that. Or he's trying to deceive you. I can't make sense of it.
Photoshop. So let me
That was Photoshop. Terry, you can't do that. Hey, they're giving you the big break of a lifetime. You know, you're doing the interview. I picked you because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay.
You know, the typical petty, small-minded kind of stuff, because he's feeling insecure, he's feeling threatened or attacked or called out, and so he lashes out at the guy, which is just childish. People that are, I think, also childish love it because they think that's like somehow he's being strong. It is the lowest common denominator, guys. It is juvenile. And I'm not saying you have to be any certain way. I'm just saying it's embarrassing as an American to see the person who represents us in other people's minds act like a child. That's not necessary. You don't need to down on this person because you feel like you're being called out. Just show, people who are wordsmiths, people that can debate, or people are good, orators, they could talk circles around people like this. And if he was on the side of the facts and not just kind of regurgitating narratives with nothing to back it up, then he would be able to slam it down. But no, he has to make fun of the guy because then his audience goes after the guy personally, and that's called a straw man. That's how this tends to work. Anytime you see this, or the guy apparently initiating some impeachment process, they're digging through his background and going, look at what he did here. And sure, he's probably a criminal, but has no bearing on whether or not it's valid that this person should be charged with something. The same with Garcia, by the way. Well, he beat his wife. Maybe. Does it have anything to do with whether they gave him due process around the one claim that mattered? No, it doesn't. But that's what you're hearing more than anything now. Well, he wasn't father of the year. That shows you they know something is up.
Because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay. But I picked you, Terry, but you're not being very nice. He had MS-13 tattooed.
We'll agree to disagree. I want to move on to something else.
Terry,
look.
Do you want me to show you the picture?
I saw the picture.
Okay, just look closely if you guys haven't seen it. Okay, it's not there. That was before. I showed you after. Trump won't let it go.
Do you want me to show you the picture?
I saw the picture.
And you think it was Photoshop?
So I guess Trump is the newest victim of the Twitter files. Did you see the picture? Well, no, I literally shook his hand, or whoever's actually seen him, right? Like, I know I can see his hands. They're not there. But the picture is what matters because that's what he saw. We're in a weird time. Deep fakes and people are being conditioned to believe whatever they see, whatever this put in front of them. We're regressing in this country in a lot of really alarming ways, quite frankly.
Here we go.
Don't Photoshop it. Go look at his hand. He had MS-13.
He did have tattoos that can be interpreted that way. I'm not an expert on them. I want to turn to Ukraine, sir.
Terry,
I want to get to Ukraine.
No. He had MS as clear as you can be, not interpreted.
That's the most important part. There's no air in that conversation. There's no way you can pretend it means anything else. He said, it's clear as day, MS-13. And then he responds to what he said. No, not interpreted. So there's no way you could pretend that he's claiming that those are letters put there to describe what the tattoos mean unless he just doesn't speak English. Very clear. And again, it's almost laughable that we even have to do this. This should be an end of story point where everyone goes, wow, that was really embarrassing. He's clearly wrong. His own audience knows that. But then we dive into the game of social engineering today, where whatever Elon Musk circles up on Twitter becomes the focal point, regardless of the facts.
Terry, I want to get to Ukraine. I'm an expert on them. I want to turn to Ukraine.
Go look at his hand. He had MS-13.
He did have tattoos that can be interpreted that way. I'm not an expert on them. I want to turn to Ukraine, sir. I want to get to Ukraine.
No. He had MS as clear as you can be, not interpreted. This is why people no longer believe the news because...
See, and all you do, if you lean into the bad Democrat media, which, let's be honest, it's left and right, as we all know, if you're not blinded by partisanship, but then all you do is say that, and people then go, yeah, they're a liar media. Well, they are, though. We know that. Doesn't mean you know for sure that he's wrong. He isn't.
When he was photographed in El Salvador, they aren't there. But let's just go on. They aren't there when he's in El Salvador.
They weren't there, but they're there now, right?
No,
but they're
in
now.
your picture.
Terry.
Ukraine, sir.
He's got MS-13 on his knuckles.
All right.
Okay?
All right. Well, we'll take a look at that.
You do such a disservice.
We'll take a look at that,
Why don't you just say it? Yes, he does. And
Because it's not true, Trump. It's crazy. This has gotten insane. Like to a level that I just can't. I think. Oh, you know what? I forgot that I had the full one.
The court has ordered you to facilitate that.
Here, let's watch through this real quickly, since this should be somewhat shorter today. Let me play this too.
But the court has ordered you to facilitate that.
I'm not the one making this decision. We have lawyers that don't want to do this.
But the buck stops in this office.
No. I follow the law. You want me to follow the law? If I would.
How insane is that? Claiming that he's not responsible, like if the buck stops over there. I mean, look, there's an argument to be made that since he is Salvadorian and now is there, that there's a legal claim that could be made, like in the context that now he's there, now it's our responsibility, but it doesn't change the constitutional violations or the breaking of the law that Trump's administration committed by doing it in the first place. So even if they're incapable of getting him back, which I disagree with, clearly, since they're paying him to keep him, you understand. That's just so silly how all this is. The point is that they would still be charged with crimes for doing it in the first place. But he's just trying to water it down by saying, oh, we're not responsible. It's really, this is disheartening in a way that anybody's falling for this. But as Seabass points in the chat, or I want to reference this, Trump is just playing an idiot. These people are masters of deception. Look, that's certainly one of the possibilities. Like I said before, though, I just have a hard time believing or I just don't think that Trump, as the person he is, would allow himself to play the idiot for anything. I just don't think that's who he is, but I definitely could be wrong. But I think it's just weird to me that we can see in every other context, this guy will literally make himself look dumb to defend like he's doing now. You know what I mean? Like to me that this would be because he truly doesn't want to be wrong or look wrong, or he actually believes it. That's what my gut tells me. But again, consider what he's saying. It very well could be an organized way to distract from something else.
The president that just wanted to do anything, I'd probably keep him right where he is.
Supreme Court says what the law is.
Listen, I was elected to take care of a problem.
They always go to this argument. It's not a fair argument. I don't care if I don't care if 80% of the country wanted you to do a certain thing. If it's against the law, it doesn't change the current reality. Now, that's that philosophical question. First of all, I don't think you can pretty much prove that's not the case. At best, you've got a portion of his side that truly believes this should be happening, and a huge portion of them that are calling out that it's a constitutional issue. So it's clearly not the reality, but it is an interesting conversation to have about that, whether or not if 100% of the country wanted him to violate the law, would that then make it okay? Two ways to look at it. Would it make it acceptable, moral, and then also alternatively, would it make it legal? It's hard. I don't even know. It's worth an actual debate or even just long-term conversation about that, because it is fascinating to think about, because technically what we understand is that, and it's not the truth if we're actually paying attention, but our collective will is what guides the government. It's such a childish thing to think today. But either way, the argument would be then that if we did feel that way, that they could suddenly just do something different. But doesn't that in and of itself violate a constitution outlined on inherent rights? It's fascinating. I mean that. I would really enjoy a conversation like that, because I don't think it would ever really end with a conclusion, but it would be worth feeling out the different perspectives on it. But the point was, though, that if you keep saying that gave me, remember my opinion. I don't think your vote translates to the outcome. I think it's very obvious to prove that. But even if it does, you can't simply argue that what even all of your base wanted somehow means that you're allowed to violate the Constitution or the law. It's not how that works.
It was a unforced error that was made by a very incompetent man, a man that turned out to be incompetent, that you always said was wonderful, great genius, right? And now you find out, all of the media now, they're saying what a mistake they made. A man who was grossly incompetent allowed us to have open borders where millions of people flowed in.
And in my opinion, that's how this works. Problem, reaction, solution, right? Now you're getting they're using that to execute the agenda that Biden was already halfway rolling out. Now, whether you think they're connected or not, you can't miss the continual linear progression of the agenda that goes back through many administrations. It's never stopped. Maybe he doesn't know that. I don't know, but you can't deny it. It's clear.
I campaigned on that issue. I wouldn't say it was my #1 issue, but it was pretty close.
Right up there.
I campaigned on that issue. I've done an amazing job. I have closed borders. He said you couldn't do it. You wouldn't be able to do it. It would
No, that's just not accurate. Now, definitely wildly reduced.
never happen. Well, it happened, and it happened very quickly. Wait a minute. When we have criminals, murderers, criminals in this country, we have to get them out, and we're doing it.
By law.
And you're allowed to do that, right? That's by law, is what he says. Due process is required, whether you like it or not, and whether it's going to take longer than you want or not. It is the current reality.
You'll pick out one man, but even the man that you picked out, he said he wasn't a member of a gang.
And you saw this part already, right? So then they go right to the one thing and they lie about it. So you have to realize if that's the best they've got, they're in a bad position.
And then they looked, and on his knuckles, he had MS-13.
There's a dispute over that.
Now, just you know, that you already saw this. That the other part wasn't cut at all. I just added in the screenshots so you could see the actual knuckles. Let me just jump past it so we have to listen to it again.
Big break of a lifetime. You know, you've never heard of you. He had MS-13 tattooed.
We'll agree to disagree. I want to move on to something else.
Terry, do you want me to show you the picture?
My God.
I saw the picture.
I still can't get past
It
it.
was Photoshop. Well,
Here we go.
And by the way, I haven't seen him comment on this, even though there's like 1,000 articles already written about this going like, my God, he's very wrong. We all know it.
Photoshop it. Go look at his hand. He had MS-13.
He did have tattoos.
He had MS as clear as you can be, not interpreted. This is why people no longer believe the news, because
when
it's
he was
fake
photographed
news.
in El Salvador, they aren't there. But let's just go on. They aren't there when he's in El Salvador.
They weren't there, but they're there now, right?
No,
but they're there
in
now.
your picture.
Terry,
Ukraine, sir.
he's got MS-13 on his knuckles.
All right.
Okay?
Well, we'll take a look at that.
You do
We'll take
such a
look.
disservice.
We'll take a look at
Why
that,
don't you
sir.
just say, yes, he does? And
Oh, I thought there was more at the end of that. All right. Well, that was the longer clip. And I've here included the full interview. If you want to watch for yourself, as always, that's how we roll. You guys can watch it. There's a lot more they get into. Everyone seems to be in the right, trying to focus on the Hegseth point and everything else for obvious reasons. And this is the bulwark that shared this to begin with, going, this is going well. Just perfect. But again, if you haven't seen it, that one's a little out of focus, but you can clearly tell there's no MS-13 on the knuckles. Here is the one where he meets him. That's the actual shot it's taken from. It's not hard. It's very clear. It's not there. And then, of course, the one before. I mean, I find this to be the most humorous because MG Truth Ultra, which is a major MAGA Trump account, posted this back when this first came around as the argument that, see, those things mean MS-13, like it was some kind of a slam dunk. And now his photograph is now debunking what Trump is saying. I find that funny. And I'm sure this tweet's probably deleted by this point, but this is a picture from before, and you can clearly see not there. And again, just to be clear, by the way, that skull is there too. The argument that that's somehow tattooed over the three. I mean, everyone's making up whatever they can to make this make sense. And it feels very Israeli propaganda style, where they just go, we'll throw out from 17 different accounts, 17 different theories, and just push them all. And you can pick which one you like, which is what people seem to do today. Now, this is Aaron Melnick making the same point. So he goes, so to recap, randos on Twitter claim to decode the tattoos, because that's where it did start. People like MJ Truth, people that just made those claims, and now they're getting people in their government positions to make the case that that is the reality. It's pretty clumsy. How it always works. If this was some kind of a DEA investigation where they pointed those things out, that's where it would have started. Not people circulating images online and making comments about it in the truth social circles and then having him point to it. But it says, so recap, randos on Twitter claiming to decode the tattoos that multiple experts on MS-13 have said had nothing to do with MS-13. That is true. Now, clearly there are people on Trump's, on the government side of this that are arguing that they could, which is the best they're getting, could mean that. But plenty of people that are experts on this have already made this case well before this, by the way. Making the arguments about the tattoos they're pointing to that aren't even remotely associated with the actual gang. But it goes, someone at the White House took that idea and crudely put MS-13 on the image, and Trump actually believed that that's what it said. That's one of the possibilities anyway. And there's the actual clip. Now, here's the interesting parts of this. These are the reactionary type of responses. So after it's posted, Z Strong, I'm not familiar with, but nothing huge, MAGA Trump account, says, why is she hiding his knuckles? I guess a random image that who knows if that's even what she put on it or if somebody added that to make this feel like it's being hidden. But what's funny about it is, look closer. You could actually literally see that this is even before I mean, that may not even be him. You know, it's hard to tell. They actually looks like a different person. The point is, his knuckle tattoos aren't there at all. Funny. But the point is, for them claiming, why is she hiding it? As if that then proves somehow that that's the case. And I said, here you go, bud. Posted the images showing his knuckles. Of course, no response. Vince Lagman, showing the same clip, says, this is why I love President Trump. He won't allow fake news. Terry Morgan, you know, the one he invited for the interview, to get away with trying to hide the fact that the Maryland man had MS-13 on his hand. Now, again, Terry very clearly said, yes, there were tattoos that people interpret to mean that. So he's not hiding the tattoo point. He's claiming it didn't say the MS-13, which it didn't. And this guy just says, that's why I love Trump, because he shouts down the fake news. No, he just literally was the fake news. That's what happened. And NYR Fan for Life says, you have to talk to these people like you're speaking to a child. If Terry believes it's photoshopped, why doesn't he take a trip to go verify it for himself? Tattoos don't lie, nor can they be removed. Go check it out, Terry. The media is the enemy of the people. Who knows whether that person is of the mind that Trump didn't really mean the actual letters, despite it being undeniable. Either way, Terry clearly did not say the tattoos were false. So these people are lost in their own broken scenario. It's wild. Read through these comments for yourself, guys. This person says, in response to me, so here, I posted this 20 hours ago with very clearly saying that he actually thought it was MS-13 tattooed, right? And the video where he very clearly makes the case that this is MS-13, not interpreted, MS-13. Okay, this guy says, it's code, dumbass, and marijuana, S smiley. Now, again, let's not forget, half or more could be bots for all we know, but it's just like, this is what you have to deal with today. And this Steven says, I could literally tattoo MS-13 on my knuckles, and it doesn't mean I've ever been affiliated with them. You could. That's why this has to be more than just assumptive points or associated points. He goes, denying your gang affiliation as an MS-13 member is a death sentence. Like to them, by the way. One of the many other points that shows that's unlikely, but not impossible, other than the obvious evidence that now shows that they're lying about all of this, right? But above party says, holy SHIT. He actually thought that the very obvious labels were tattoos. I mean, guys, just look at the picture, though. Like, it's wild to think that you actually thought that those were, I mean, again, or he just is lying to you. Casey Bird says, looks like MS-13 to me. Of course, with that Trump fight picture in her bio. He goes, you can't put a pic underneath all day, all day long. It says MS-13. What the F is going on? Seabass James says the MS-1 and 3 aren't tattooed on his skin, but rather added to the photo to indicate how someone interpreted each tattoo. Casey Bird says, prove it. That's my point. So if nobody, and this is what I said, actually. I said, here you go, bud, and gave the same pictures. Of course, no response. And I said, now the real question is, had no one posted these under your nose, would you have carried on claiming this was false because you chose to never look for yourself? That's what's going on. See if there's a response. Nope. Vince Langman, again, saying, that's why I love Trump, because he shouts down the fake news, right? Stephen Cunningham simply posted what I said, showing that this is not the case, but I don't think it's going to matter. Now, this one is from Forbes from, where's the date? April 30th today. And it says, the conspiracy behind Kilmar Abrego Garcia's tattoos explained after Trump insists Dr. MS-13 ink is real. And it simply says, some social media users have suggested the marijuana leaf represents M. The smiley face represents S. Those seem at least very possible, right? That's an obvious potential. And the cross and skulls are cover-ups for 1 and 3. So now you're telling me that he's tattooed over his tattoos, but he's still a member of the gang? That doesn't seem to make much. Like, it's just becoming so abstract. And again, that's backed up. That some people put that out. Some people claim the tattoo, somehow the skull means 3. Some people claim that it's actually a backward 3. Everyone's got a different narrative, which pretty much shows you that everyone's guessing to make sense of what they want it to be. But it goes, and the skull and cross are cover-ups for 1 and 3. Trump seemed to insist during the interview that actual letters and numbers were tattooed on his hands. That's very clear. Now, it says the White House, when asked if Trump believes he actually has the MS and 1 and 3 tattooed on his knuckles, they said, quote, which shows you that I think they know exactly what's happening, quote, ask any law or immigration enforcement official who's been on the ground about his tattoos, they're MS-13. You didn't answer the question. Clearly, they're just going, that's what those tattoos mean. Well, that wasn't the point. That's the argument. Everyone knows that's the argument. There's plenty of experts not associated with the government that tell you that's not what they mean, but you can decide for yourself. The question was whether he actually thought that's what it meant. Their answer shows you that they know that. That's how whether it's Obama or Bush, that's always what they do. They give you right down the middle. Trump's an expert at that. Now, Ozarkistan, how do you say that? Ozarkistanian says, sick of this, and this is in response to people that are pretending like he didn't actually claim the MS and 13 were on there. He says, sick of this BS. It's disqualifying if you can't admit that Trump clearly said that he thinks that the photoshopped image was real. He said that. And that dude actually had the letters on his hands. It's insane that we can't own any mistakes this man makes. This is a Trump supporter. Of course, and you can't see the response because Twitter's totally not a censorship platform. Always the case, guys. It's everywhere you look. Now, you could find it. It's on there. I always find them in other people's comments or other tags or responses to it. But somehow, there's plenty of ways where they just don't let you see responses for obvious reasons, especially when they're pushing back on the agenda. That's how that works. Now, I've included the interview. Watch it for yourself. There's information in there that's relevant. Here's what Fox News put out. Many reasons this is relevant. This is today. Lindsey Graham mocks Democrats as Trump, which again, that's the golden goose, right? Democrats are dumb. And then whatever you say next is gospel. And he says, as Trump DEA nominee confirms MS-13 gang tattoos, clearly not even close to what it actually even says in the article, but confirms that they might be, is what you would actually write. Of course, Fox doing its job. Now, of course, to be the counterbalance, guys, recognize that the left does the same stupid thing. Republicans are Nazis, and then whatever you say next is accepted as gospel by the team sport politics side. I don't think that's the majority of either side right now. Now it says, Graham that asked whether MS-13 members in a kind of trying to make fun of how they're like making it sound stupid to ask whether this is identifying, ask whether members have membership cards or anything similar to the public to identify them. Like what he's doing there is trying to make it sound like it's dumb for us to prove that they're gang members. It's not just insulting and embarrassing. Like this is wildly dangerous. What they're doing step by step is like fundamentally destroying the things that maybe still hold this country together. And what he's saying is that alluding to the fact that we don't have cards, so we have to trust what they tell you. No, that's why due process is there so they can present the evidence. And that's why the system is set up the way it is. Of course, they don't have membership cards, but for you to argue that they don't have that, therefore what we tell you these tattoos mean, even though Trump just got caught lying about the tattoos, is absolute. Lindsey Graham is a cartoon in this conversation as usual, but then it says given disputes about what they mean. Now it says based on your time and experience and expertise with the DEA. Now explain for me why even the DEA would be an expert on tattoos of gang members. Wouldn't that be Homeland Security? They're focused on drug, and there's an overlap clearly. But you tell me what you think. I just think it's funny that they're just going after whatever they can. I'd imagine the DEA agent was the one willing to do whatever they were told. That's my gut feeling. But it says, what does that photo or those markings suggest to you? And he said suggest, to be clear. And then he goes, well, they suggest that he's an MS-13 member. He says that those are his markings, his brand. So a smiley face, a skull, a cross, and a weed plant, or his unique markings. Now, let's be clear that even and this same government response in the past, like the last couple of weeks, have made the argument, what was it, that he was part of a Western clique that only is in New York, which he's never been to, or on top of that he is a specific, I think it's Chiquito, which I think it means small, but the point is they claim that's his member or his level, which means he's a leader of the gang, which is what they keep saying, even though that experts who actually know what they're talking about have said that term means that they're not even part of the gang yet, but trying to be. They're lying, guys. They're lying about everything you're talking about. None of that is the reality, seeing as how at the best they have assumption, but everything they're pointing to claim that we know about him are things that prove in a way that he's never been a part of it. Not from New York, never been there. That term doesn't even mean what they claim it means. So he's not a leader, MS-13, human trafficking, rapist, monster, terrorist. None of those things have even remotely been proven about most of the people they're talking about, if any, as far as I could tell. But it says to dispel further criticism. Oh, he goes on to say, When asked what the leaf on his first knuckle stood for, as if you could know that for sure, Cole said it was a marijuana, which starts with M. That's his answer. Not that we know for sure that always means M on your and gang tattoos, but that, well, marijuana starts with an M. Wow, bombshell. And then he says, the second finger was a smiley face, he said, which starts with S. Breaking news stuff here, guys. Yeah, we all know it starts with S. Now, does that prove anything? No, it does not. And then he says, followed by the number 1, and then says what looks like a backward 3 from here. Wow, this is some pretty compelling stuff. And here's what Lindsey Graham, remember, this is what Fox News framed as confirms the tattoos. Guys, these people are ridiculous. These are cartoons. Like, we should be making fun of this. But the problem is that partisans ignore how dumb it is on their side. Then it says, based on your time and experience with the DEA, the next one says, to dispel further criticism, Graham went on to ask if there might be any other organizations that would use that series of symbols. And his response is a negative. So this is just so ridiculous to me that you can contrive this and argue that somehow that these symbols don't just arbitrate. Like, I'm willing to bet you anything that you can look and look up a tattoo shop and you're going to find an endless amount of pat leaves, crosses, skulls, everything we're talking about. And yes, it also could just mean that he secretly wants to show you he's part of a gang that is supposed to be proud about it. No, never have we argued that that's not the case. The evidence does not support that. There's no proof of any kind. My point is that he never got due process. That's it. Even if he is a gang member, he still did not get due process. And that's the only part of this that we've been talking about. What we're going through is showing you their lies around it to hide that fact. It is wild. The controversy over Garcia's tattoos also boiled over during a recent interview with Terry Morgan. This is all they said. Quote, wait a minute. He had MS-13 on his knuckles, Trump said. Before Morgan countered that, there were, quote, some tattoos that were interpreted that way. Oh, you'd be forgiven for expecting more. No, they just cemented in the debate so you could choose to side with Trump. You think they can't do their due diligence on that and be like, yeah, that's actually not true? No, they have an interest in backing their side, like all of the media does that are not honest. Now, Aaron Melnick follows up with some reports around Garcia that I think are very relevant. Even the New York Times put some stuff out that I think is relevant in this. He says, this is pretty outrageous. The Trump administration, after repeatedly saying it couldn't do anything about Garcia or Abrego Garcia, for the first time, inquired about releasing him. And Bukele said no, or so we're told. Even though Mr. Abrego has never been convicted of any crime, neither in El Salvador or the United States, by the way, and is being imprisoned without trial. So, Michael Schmidt says the Trump administration recently sent a diplomatic note to officials in El Salvador. Clearly on the record, there's ways they could have done this without making it something that you could see, right? I think this is set up to make it appear that they can do nothing. You can decide for yourself. To inquire about releasing Abrego Garcia. Now, why would they suddenly do that when they've been telling you that they're never going to? Never coming back. Well, because they wanted this to appear now that they couldn't. I mean, or they're losing and they tried and they failed. Either way, it shows you that they are not honest about this. That your narrative you've been spinning out there, if you blindly support this, is false. And they know that. And it says, but the Bukele government said no. All this adds to increasing confusion from the Trump administration about whether it's really trying to compel the court or really trying to comply with the court order to return him, which is the law. That's why he skipped over the point about the Supreme Court, because that's a big deal. They have ordered him to do so. And I'll read it from the article about this whole game they're playing with the word facilitate. It says, Trump said in an ABC News interview that he does have the ability to help return him, but is not willing to because he believes he's a gang member. The one thing that we have no evidence for, or one of the many things anyway, but the point is there's other parts that you can discuss and prove about this. That's the one that they've been lying about. So they're using the lie they manufactured to push in why he can't be returned. Now, the overlapping idea in this is that the Supreme Court has ruled that he has to bring him back. Now, remember, they said facilitate and effectuate. And they made this really crazy response about why effectuate somehow was like taking the executive branch power, which I disagree with, but certainly you could make that argument when you get mired down in the definitions. But the point is they then fine, facilitate, knowing what that meant. But the reason they did this, which we can clearly see, is that they knew that effectuate was impossible to play this game with. So they pulled that out, and now they could pretend like all we got to do is just sit back and wait for him to show up, right? No. And look, let's be clear. The court justices have said that's not what that means, and they're just acting like they're lost. Oh, isn't that what it means? They're playing everybody for fools, and it's embarrassing. It really is. Now, here's the article. We'll read directly from it. Full article is here. Diplomatic note possibly explains this a week-long delay. Now, this is just one of these breaking reports saying the Trump administration recently sent a diplomatic note to El Salvador to inquire about releasing Garcia, whom the government officials have been ordered by the Supreme Court to help free, according to the three people with the knowledge of the matter. But the authoritarian government of Bukele, the leader of El Salvador, said no. Two of the people said. The Bukele administration claimed the man should stay in El Salvador because he's a Salvadorian citizen. So I think this was clearly cultivated to make that statement, which again is there's like I said, there's a valid point to try to be made in there. But what's incredible about this is any other time in the past you've seen Donald Trump say he wants to do something and then gets pushback from somebody that he can bully around. What do you expect? Bullying around. Except not now. Suddenly, apparently Bukele's more powerful than Trump. And he says, shut up, Trump, I'm gonna do what I want. And Trump goes, okay, I'm sorry. I'm joking, but the point is that you could interpret it that way. And now even putting it out there may trigger Trump to lash out because that's the kind of person he is. But the point is, I feel this is being cultivated for that reason. And you would expect Trump to act differently if he was actually being bucked by somebody that he thinks he's controlling. Or maybe he is. Now this one, Trump says he could free Abrego, Garcia, from El Salvador, but won't. Now, actually, I don't think I had any. Oh, I think it's right here. Okay, I did have some. Go through this. New York Times article says President Trump, whose administration has insisted he could not bring Kelmar Abrego Garcia back from El Salvador to the United States, said he does have the ability to help return him, but is not willing to. So overlap that with what we just heard. In the interview, in the other reports from Rubio, that we can't do that. He's El Salvador. It's not even our responsibility. Except in the middle of you saying that, you were over here going, we want him back. Can you do that? Is that okay? Or now on the record, after pretending you can't, saying, of course I can, but I don't want to. I mean, again, there's some point to always be made about whether this whole tactic is actually by design to just literally confuse everybody. So you don't know what statement you're pointing back there. You're saying he's not allowed to, but here he just said today that he could, but doesn't want to. And so everyone's pointing at something different. I mean, there's a real point to be made about like social engineering or like asymmetrical warfare. Like this is about trying to kind of confuse everybody. Or he's just stumbling through these choices and getting exposed for being a liar. I mean, you can decide for yourself. The bottom line is that he's contradicting what one of the central points was, that he's not even able to. It's not my responsibility, but now he's making it clear that he could, just doesn't want to. That's embarrassing. It says, quote, you could get him back, but there's a phone on this desk, Terry said. That's in the interview. And the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court ordered him to do so. And he says, I could. It says, quote, and if there were gentlemen, and if he were the gentleman that you say he is, which I don't think any of them are even saying that. They're just using that to claim Democrats think he's a saint, and I'm telling you he's not. No, I don't see anybody making that argument. It's that you're breaking the law. But he goes, if he was the gentleman you say he was, I would do that. But he's not. Pointing to nothing but assumptive arguments and complete conjecture, and says the Mr. Trump added that government lawyers do not want to help bring Mr. Abrego back to the United States. Again, to reiterate the obvious point. If he were the gentleman you say he is, has no bearing on whether or not the law applies. So by that argument, if Trump thinks you're a bad person, he can just say your rights don't matter. Because remember, the principle does not change based on whether you're an alien, a legal alien, or American citizen. The constitutional principle is the same. Just like I said, by deporting people in the same way, that the principle is the same for you, not even to get into whether he's, the 5 times he's floated that they want to send Americans. But just recognize that. By saying that is the way to get you to go, well, he beats his wife, or whatever you're assuming around all of that, which has no bearing on whether or not he should be given due process around the claims being loaded at him. Now it says, Mr. Trump's comments not only undermine previous statements by his top aides, but were a blunt sign that his administration's intention to double down on and defy the courts, which is a huge deal. Whatever side you're on, guys, even if you agree with him, you have to acknowledge that this is a big deal. What's happening right now is the kind of disillusion. Like if the Supreme Court is ruling they should do something and he denies it, what would usually follow would be impeachment articles of impeachment, even as a threat to get him to fall in line. Not even in the sense that the point is Trump supporters seem to look at that and act like that's like unprecedented. Like the judicial power branch taking the power of the government. No, it's not. You guys are blinded by these narratives coming from people that either don't know what they're talking about or are trying to trick you for politics. That is the way the system is supposed to work. Look, if the Supreme Court could take that ruling, and the argument being that there's 6 conservative judges on the 9 there, and that they're ruling that he broke the law and that he has to comply. Now, if he doesn't want to find himself in legal troubles, he could simply comply. It wouldn't be that difficult. But if they did, that starts the other problem where now he's going to be exposed that you broke the law in a lot of other more egregious ways. And that's why they're just kind of standing their ground. But if they do not do this and nothing happens to reprimand the president for not following the Supreme Court, then nothing means anything anymore. And you know my opinion, I think we've been at a similar point for a long time, but this is showing people that. And maybe actions will change by a lot of people that are very bad people because they never really recognized that they weren't going to be held accountable. I don't know. It's not a good thing. Let's be clear about that. I'm looking forward to discussing this again with Bruce Fine and Jeffrey on the podcast we have now, the BitChute podcast they invite me on rather, and it's because Bruce Fine knows what he's talking about. He's an expert in the field, and comes from the government, the background, the Reagan administration, And the point is that these arguments are very foundational to what this country claims that it is, and moment by moment we're being destroyed, and I think it's obvious why. Now, it says Trump officials have said that because he was now in a Salvadoran prison, it was up to the Salvadoran government to release him. But apparently Trump is now challenging that by saying he could if he wanted to, which I really do think, if you might, my opinion of the kind of childish nature of him, is that this is ultimately him just feeling like he doesn't want to admit that he can't do what he, I can do what I want. I'm powerful. I'm in control. I don't know. It seems like a stupid move for him to say this now. That's why. But it says the Justice Department has argued that it can respond to the Supreme Court's demand, that the administrations facilitate his release by doing little more than letting him enter should he come along. During that meeting, Stephen Miller, Mr. Trump's deputy chief of staff, and relevant, the architect of his immigration agenda. So you have a very, very obviously dishonest Zionist, proud Zionist, who is leading this whole thing. One of the other many examples showing you where this all, I don't think we can hide how clearly this is connected to the Zionist agenda. Whether that's what's driving it or they're just gaining from it, clearly, by their weaponized migration discussion that they're all proudly discussed, that is part of it. But again, remember that this is important for the U.S. government too. So they're probably working together to manufacture it all. All just thoughts, consider the points. But it says also he argued that any question about releasing Abrego Garcia needed to be directed to Bukele rather than Trump. Again, all of them looking stupid now because Trump came out and said the opposite. Mr. Bukele also refused to help bring Garcia back to the United States, arguing it would be akin to releasing a terrorist, despite them having no criminal charges. The White House did not respond to requests for comment, of course. Mr. Trump also told ABC News his administration was right to send Garcia to the prison in El Salvador designed for terrorists, known as CCOT, despite various government officials previously saying in court that the deportation was an administrative error. It's ridiculous where we are. Garcia, who entered the United States illegally in 2012, was arrested in March of 2019 while looking for work at Home Depot. We've gone over all of this. Now, I think, there's 3 more things. Just very quickly wanted to show, I'll jump through these. Remember, in the show we did yesterday, guys, or day before, it was yesterday, they've now moved Garcia to specifically a prison in El Salvador for people who are not gang members. It says the prison categorically excludes anyone, even accused of being a gang member. So their central claim, this guy's a gang member terrorist, has now been broken down even by their actions in multiple different ways, and we're still hearing these lies. It says we only house the common people, no gang members here. It says for human rights advocates in El Salvador, the United States, and details of Garcia's transfer from CCOT, a supermax prison specifically designed for gang members, to a low-security prison from which gang members are excluded, contradicts a central claim made by both governments, that he is a dangerous member of this gang and a terrorist, all of which they've never proven and everybody denies, and evidence has been presented to make that case. Wild. And on top of that, what was the other one? Oh, well, just the over, I'll include this again. My breakdown of this, which is about 58 minutes, going through all the legal realities of the case, showing you, and here are all the documents from the court, literally highlighting for you that they've been lying about this the entire time. This is the 2019 Home Depot point, the claims from a corrupt cop that was later fired of an anonymous source. That's the one thing they point to. That's the source that made the claim, if that even exists, from the corrupt cop to claim he was a member. They have information that they never presented that got recirculated through 2 different documents. That's what they point to as the 2 documents. And then Trump's own administration deemed he was not a risk and let him stay with the withholding of removal because of the threat from El Salvador. Nothing has changed since then. They just decided to argue this and went forward because of the obvious Israel agenda that is happening here. And the deportation, the immigration point, and the rolling out of the biometric control structure, and all the things that this adds to. So watch this if you really want to understand how obvious this is. And I said, right now, it's paramount that Americans understand 2 things. 1, even illegal immigrants have due process rights. Here's Grok. Do illegal aliens have the right to due process the same as Americans? Yes. Illegal aliens have the right to due process. You shouldn't need, and this is another one. Why do you say that? Zadadas versus Davis, however you pronounce that name, another 2001 precedent saying the same. But please watch it. I think it's important to understand how they've been lying about this. Now, back to that. That's what they're saying, is that 2019 point is all they're pointing to. Now it says, this is a MS-13 gang member, Trump said during the interview. Mr. Abrego Garcia has never been charged with or convicted of being a gang member anywhere. During his deportation proceedings, that some evidence was introduced that he belonged to MS-13, and judges decided it was enough to keep him in custody while the matter was resolved. Now, that was, again, the anonymous source, the corrupt cop, and a bull's hat. That's it. And it says, but other judges have expressed doubt about that evidence. Now, I'm going to read from you directly what Judge Zenas said about this in this recent ruling. But it says, the evidence against Garcia consisted of nothing more than his Chicago Bulls hat and a hoodie, and a vague, uncorroborated allegation from a confidential informant claiming he belonged to MS-13, it's specifically their Western clique in New York, a place he never lived, and the title they said they gave him was not accurate, and that on top of all of it, that this is ultimately, just continuing, it says, a place he never lived, it says, Judge Zenas, who was overseeing the efforts to bring him back to the United States, wrote in an order this month. So, and this is what they've continued to cascade through the conversation. So you looked at it and argue, we know for sure this is nothing but hearsay, repeated more than once. Now, that doesn't therefore prove he's not to be to be objective, just like the rest of the administration refuses to be. It could be. And as you know what's coming, you know how we could find out? Due process. And in the reverse, in the same way, why you can have people sent illegally without, Americans end up in a prison of foreign government, the lack of due process, even by mistake. Now, again, moved him to a non-gang prison, showing you yet again another example of this. And I'll include the show we did. This is the crux of it right here. It's an hour long of just the article around this, but the title was The Unprecedented Gaslighting and Lies Around Abrego Garcia. Again, no one's, at least honest out there, is claiming we know for sure that this guy's the best guy in town. I don't know that. All I can prove is what the evidence we have, and none of that backs up the claims they're making. Now, here are some other examples. Oh, actually, before we get to that, to reiterate the point about due process that we went over yesterday, I want to reiterate this importantly, that Rubio, as the Daily Beast, a Republican platform, says splits with Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi on due process. Now, it says Secretary of State Marco Rubio forgot the gospel, according to Donald Trump on Sunday, by admitting that anyone on U.S. soil is entitled to a fair hearing before being removed from the country. And we'll play this for you now. Oh, at least I don't know how I do that sometimes. I guess I didn't grab it. Hold on a sec. It's right here. So this is interesting. And the reason I wanted to bring it up again is I wanted to play for you what is actually being stated and how very clear this is. That he says, with that, he said, yes, absolutely. Starts the conversation with that and then tries to water it down, acting like, I'll make the case as it goes through. Because I'm just trying to fill the time while this is downloading. All he's really doing is trying to argue that the illegality of his presence somehow changes that. Even though he starts it by saying very clearly, literally anybody, which you know if you're paying attention, has due process. So here's the YouTube video. Or is it not done yet? One second. Why is that not downloading? Apologies, guys. That's what I get for not having it ready. So I also want to note too that I think that he looks uncomfortable. Just my personal opinion. If you look, he looks very unhappy. If you look at the way that Rubio looks in the kind of line of even just on the main image here. You can just see his face. He looks, I get the sense that he is feeling worried. Like we saw for the first part where Trump tried to throw the whole thing at Rubio and Rubio tried to throw it back at Trump. That shows you that there's something going on here. Let's not forget that Rubio and Trump don't like each other. They've made these statements all over the place before he was put in this position. And even his own staff, his own people were like, no, Rubio's not going to happen. That's crazy. And then they picked him and they go, yeah, he's the best one ever. Typical partisan. But trust me, guys, you could see that they're not happy with each other. Oh, you're kidding me. Apparently it's going to take a really long time to download, or maybe we'll come back to it. So let's do this. I'll play this first clip. I'm not familiar with this guy, Billy Binion, reporter for Reason, which of course in some people's minds will just absolutely dismiss anything he says despite it being proven, or vice versa, left and right, always how it goes. The point is what he's saying is true. It's accurate, easy to prove. I just think it's a good compilation of these basic things that people have a hard time understanding right now. So we'll play this and I'll see if I can deal with that video. Yeah, it looks like I did this too. I must have done something today where I skipped over some of this stuff. This one's quick though. I can do this from the Twitter download. But it's a good kind of overview of pretty much everything we've already been telling you about due process. But it really is just disconcerting that so many people don't seem to understand the most basic, essential rights that, the foundational rights that people point to from, left and right, by the way, and yet make these arguments around why this is the most important thing in our country and then somehow don't even understand these things. And I mean, like at the highest levels of power.
Billy Binion, criminal justice reporter at Reason. You've probably heard some wild takes on due process lately. Let's clear the air. Vice President J.D. Vance said, "The entire American media and left-wing industrial complex has decided the most important issue today is that the Trump admin deported an MS-13 gang member and illegal alien."
Don't you love the left, what do they call it?
American media and left-wing due process. The entire American media and left-wing industrial complex.
Left-wing industrial complex. It's just so clumsy. Military industrial complex. There's terms that we've used in the past. Like if you're going to try to carve that out about just one side, this is why people are waking up to this stuff. It's, you couldn't just call it and we can go off forever. My point is that you can clearly see they're trying to turn this into some kind of controlled entity, even though all of them are that. It's your government, guys. That's the complex. It's wild to me how easy this is to sway people because they have been convinced to hate whoever they're pointing to, whether it's the Yemenis or the Gaza, whatever it is, or your neighbor.
Has decided the most important issue today is that the Trump admin deported an MS-13 gang member and illegal alien. Okay, so this has nothing to do with being left-wing, and everything to do with the Trump administration illegally deporting someone in violation of a court order and binding law to a prison with many others, where they're being held without due process. So what is due process exactly? Put simply, it is the legal principle that promises people the right to challenge the evidence against them before the government takes away their liberty. Is it possible that some people sent to a Salvadoran prison were in a gang? Yes. Is it also possible some were not in a gang? Yes. Which is precisely why we have due process, to test the integrity of the government's allegations. This is an American value, not a left-wing value. Right-wing influencer Jack Posobiec said, "Did Rachel Morin get due process? Did Laken Riley get due process?" No one ever asks that. So Rachel Morin and Laken Riley were murdered by immigrants, and that is horrible and tragic. But Posobiec's post implies he doesn't understand what due process is at a basic level. By his logic, we should abolish the doctrine for anyone accused of bad acts, which is exactly backwards. The point of due process is to provide fairness to people accused of crimes because the government doesn't always get it right. Because we said so isn't good enough. The Constitution protects unpopular people for a reason. Founder of Outkick, Clay Travis, said, "If the president can't deport illegal immigrants, then we have no border at all." Okay, so there is a big difference between merely deporting people and sending them to a notorious prison in El Salvador. President Nayib Bukele suspended basic civil liberties there over 3 years ago, like freedom of assembly and due process, so he could imprison people indefinitely without giving them their day in court. And it isn't relevant that the people deported weren't US citizens, because the Supreme Court has repeatedly confirmed that even immigrants suspected of being in the US illegally are still entitled to due process of law.
And to be very clear, even those proven to be here illegally still have due process. That's Reno versus Flores, specifically in deportation cases. Just to make that clear, that is the reality roundly upheld by Supreme Court. Read it for yourself.
Former Libertarian Party Chair Angela McArdle said, "I can't fully articulate this problem yet, but I think that libertarianism has been hijacked by radical empathy, and that we don't fully understand the concept of a right to a fair trial and the presumption of innocence."
God, if only we could be overtaken by radical empathy. That would be fantastic. But unfortunately, that's not what's actually happening.
Libertarians have elevated it over all other rights and factors. So unless you want to argue that people like George Washington and James Madison had fallen prey to radical empathy, then this argument doesn't make sense. The founders made due process central to the Constitution, not because they loved criminals, but because they understood that any system of justice will give people a chance to publicly challenge the evidence against them before the government takes away their liberty indefinitely, as the government has done here. That should be important to anyone who cares about the Constitution and rule of law. Libertarians who believe the government is perfect and trustworthy is not a coherent ideology. If you love the Constitution, then you have to love due process.
Seems pretty simple to me. I really am blown away that there's anybody out there that doesn't understand these basic fundamental things. Like, I mean, somebody literally just people talking about this conversation like, oh, I just looked up due process. And it's like, how is that not something that literally everyone in this country is very aware of? Well, because we're not taught these things. Like you're not taught about the Fed or the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, you know, whatever these foundational parts of what this country was and built on that we don't get taught about for obvious reasons. I mean, there's so many things like that, or jury nullification. They don't want you to know how you can really affect things. But the bottom line, we're all constantly being deceived by the very structure that's pointing at itself. It's everywhere you look. Now, here is a crack. Now, you can decide for yourself why this happened. Because let's be clear, this is a wild shift. Like even Trump saying he could now and not. This is all happening in the last couple of days. This was from 2 days ago. And he makes it clear. And I think he's trying to put himself in a separate category because he's not dumb. And he knows that he can see people are now, whether that you think it ever translates to actual accountability, which I'd love to see that ever. So hard to believe it's going to happen now, but I hope so. Or just that they know they're losing control of this, or they know it'll affect their money or their next campaign, whatever is driving it. I think he's recognizing that people are seeing this, and this is him putting himself out on the other side of this, which probably got pushed back from their own team. You can decide.
Let's talk now about some new reporting that came in overnight. I want to just go through it for you and for our audience. 3 U.S. citizen children have been deported with their mothers. Now, this is according to the Washington Post. The family's lawyer says one of them is a 4-year-old with stage 4 cancer, deported without medication or ability to contact doctors. The family's lawyers are also saying their clients were denied communication with family and legal representatives before being deported. And it's raising concerns about the issue of due process, that it's being violated. So let me ask you, is everyone on U.S. soil, citizens and non-citizens, entitled to due process?
Yes, of course. But let me tell you, it looks in immigration standing, the laws are very specific. If you're in this country unlawfully, you have no right to be here and you must be removed. That's what the law says. Somehow over the last 20 years, we've completely lost this notion that somehow or completely adopted this idea that, yes, we have immigration laws, but once you come into our country illegally, it triggers all kinds of rights that can keep you here indefinitely. That's why we were being flooded at the border.
I mean, okay, this is important to break down. Like, I don't know if you missed the immediate manipulation, the sidestep. So he made it clear that, yes, they do, which we all should know. Yes, illegal immigrants have rights, constitutional rights upheld by our Constitution and the Supreme Court, especially due process, especially around deportation. So what he does there is he goes, yes, but then goes on to make the case that somehow they're illegally, they should be, well, yeah, no one's arguing that's not the case. You guys are skipping what you just said is the first point, the process. You're just getting rid of them because you claim they're illegal. Well, how do we know that? We already have countless examples of them removing people who were not here illegally, who had no criminal record, over and over and over. So let's not pretend like this is not a clear sidestep. Listen again.
New reporting that came have been deported with their mothers or ability to contact with about the issue.
Right here.
Is everyone on U.S. soil, citizens and non-citizens, entitled to due process?
And well, you know what? She does say it in a way that leaves the open possibility for illegal immigrants being different, but that's not true. Just in case we have to nail that down for the 40,000th time, it does apply to illegal immigrants.
Yes, of course. But let me tell you, it looks in immigration standing, the laws are very specific. If you're in this country unlawfully, you have no right to be here and you must be removed. That's what.
Yes. No one disagrees with that who's not a moron. But again, you'd have to make that case. Otherwise, you could accuse literally anybody you don't like as being an illegal immigrant, which would then argue that you have no requirement to prove that. How does anybody not see the slippery slope there? It's not even a slippery slope. I mean, that's just basic corruption. That you could simply just apply it however you want to whoever you want because you made a little carve out for as long as you call them that, you'd get away with it, at least in the beginning.
The law says. Somehow over the last 20 years, we've completely lost this notion that somehow or completely adopted this idea that, yes, we have immigration laws, but once you come into our country illegally, it triggers all kinds of rights that can keep you here indefinitely.
No, this is either him proving, like we've already seen, that he doesn't actually understand what he's talking about, or he's trying to manipulate you. Because if you're claiming that you triggering right, those are existing, inalienable, God-given, always existing rights that apply to literally, like he just told you, to everyone in the country. Right? So are you now arguing that we want to change the existing inherent rights that have always been there? Well, if that's what he's arguing, or are you saying that something has now shifted, which I can prove they have not? Either there's not new legislation that argues some new thing should be. He's talking about due process. And all he's really trying to make it sound like is what Trump and Holman and, what he mumbled at you and said, these people are 20 million people, which is not accurate. There's countless ways you can prove that. It's a lot of people still. And yes, if they're illegal, then they should be deported. But it has to go through the process back to the original point. Otherwise, they can do whatever they want, which they always will. But what he's trying to make it sound like is that somehow it's going to trigger all these things and they could be here forever. All he's highlighting is the Constitution. So either you agree with it or you don't. They do have the right to prove or to argue that there's not the case. Now, what you could get into are the arguments of asylum. That's a fair conversation to have. But again, the reality is there's laws that exist in that conversation. If we want them to be different, then that's how you would go into it, not just deeming them no longer valid, even though people live here for decades under those asylum grants and whatever else. But you could have this conversation as the American people. I'd argue that there's no constitutional reality of guaranteeing somebody has the right to come here, unless there's something that I'm missing in that. Let me know what you think. But the point is that ultimately we've always framed ourselves as being the, give me, you're hungry, you're poor, and all that, right? So it just seems contradictory in 1,000 different ways. But the core point is that he was already here. He was already granted a withholding of removal, which is not necessarily asylum, but if look it up for yourself. It is a legal granted allowance to stay here. And for 14 years, he went every single time they called with no question and proved he was good, had a family, blah, blah, blah. So all they really are doing is manufacturing this whole story to make it sound like what they're doing is taking advantage when all they're doing is following the law, and he is not.
That's why we were being flooded at the border. And we've
in case that gets taken out of context, I'm not talking about illegal aliens. I'm talking about people that were here legally, and Garcia in this case, or asylum cases, or seeking citizenship, and all the different overlaps. That's to reiterate, if you're illegally here, then that's not what we're discussing. But it would still require due process to prove that.
That, and that's why you see a historically low number of people not just trying to cross our border, trying to cross the border into Panama, all the way down in the Darien Gap. I mean, it's been a huge help for those countries as well. On the headline, that's a misleading headline. Okay, 3 U.S. citizens, ages 4, 7, and 2, were not deported.
They were.
Their mothers, who are legally in this country, were deported.
They were too.
Children went with their mothers.
Now, here's the important part about this. We just talked about it yesterday. The evidence has now come out through court that ultimately the agents were basically, the idea is that the mother was with the child, and they were saying that the father was trying to get in communication with the mother so they could ultimately let the child stay here, and that the ICE agents would not let it. In fact, there was a moment, and this is in the court documents, where they were on the phone. The mother was trying to call the husband, and they literally grabbed the phone out of her hand and hung it up. And now make it sound like this was their choice because they know that there's no one to speak for them. And if they do, they'll call them illegal aliens and terrorists. So at the end of the day, these people are monsters, guys. And it's not because of just this one thing. They also support genocide in a very, very bombastic way. They are not people that care about human life. So what we're talking about is another example of abuse where you're talking about children who are U.S. citizens. How does that not matter? Who did want to stay with their father and they wouldn't let it happen. That's what the information is showing. Again, if more information comes out, it'll evolve. But right now, that's what was recently shown as usual, from the actual exchange of information during court, as opposed to what he screams on a show.
If those children are U.S. citizens, they can come back into the United States if there's their father or someone here who wants to assume them.
He was already there, and they wouldn't let it happen.
But ultimately, who was deported was their mothers who were here illegally. The children just went with their mothers.
Yeah, but again, the game to play, so to claim they weren't deported, even though they literally were deported, is just the kind of stupidity we're used to now. And you could make the argument that they were deported, but there's the nuance for why that's okay. But to just claim that they weren't deported is what you see online now. And then many people actually argue that they weren't, and that gets contorted into they never even got removed. They're still here. But it's insane the kind of ways this cascades through the conversation because they know what they're doing. They're, I mean, in many ways, doing this against themselves, deceiving their own people. Now, who does that help, guys?
But it wasn't like you guys make it sound like ICE agents kicked down the door and grabbed the 2-year-old and threw him on an airplane. That's misleading.
Yeah.
That's just.
Well, nobody even said that, by the way. What's misleading is what you're doing. Now, yes, clearly the corporate media lies all the time. And yes, they play up things to suit their interest like you all do. But the truth is what we've just gone through. And ultimately, what you're doing is trying to make it sound like it wasn't deportation, which it clearly was. So you could say they're both doing the same thing in different ways.
It's not true.
Just to be clear, because I do want to get to the overhaul at the State Department, is it the U.S. policy to deport children, even U.S. citizens, with their families, and I hear what you're saying, without due process?
Okay. It's amazing that despite, look, the corporate media on left and right are not to be trusted. But information is information. You should check it for yourself, regardless of how often somebody lies. The truth is, what she's saying is important. And the reality is, regardless of the claim, every single person, and most importantly, American citizens, have due process. I only say most importantly because of the context of the way people view this. In principle, it's no different. But understand that we're talking about 3 children, U.S. citizens, whether their mother was illegal or not. Again, in principle, it doesn't change it. They weren't given a process. They were removed, and they wouldn't even allow them to speak with the father to potentially let them stay. One of these kids had cancer, apparently.
To be very clear there.
Well, no. Again, if someone's in this country unlawfully, illegally, that person gets deported.
Okay, see, he did it again. She asked explicitly about the due process in between those two things, and all he says is if they're illegal, they get deported. Yeah, she just agreed with you. The point is, are they given due process? And you're admitting yet again that they do not, or that you don't care about the reality of the Constitution.
If that person is with a 2-year-old child or has a 2-year-old child and says, I want to take my child with me, well, then what? You have 2 choices. You can say, yes, of course you can take your child, whether they're a citizen or not, because it's your child. Or you can say, yes, you can go, but your child must stay behind. And then your headlines would read, U.S. holding hostage.
Probably. He's probably right about that. The point, though, is that that's a false binary like everything else they do. You're skipping the option where the father was trying to get in contact with the mother because they wanted him to stay here, and you guys wouldn't let that happen, to the point of physically removing the phone from their hands. But you see, people like this don't care about any of that, whether he even knows about it.
2-year-old, 4-year-old, 7-year-old, while mother deported. So the parents make that choice. I imagine those 3 U.S. citizen children have fathers here in the United States.
Oh, you imagine? See, we went over this yesterday. Go through the documentation and just it'll give you chills how disgusting this person is, who knows about this, who knows that these people did, and you stopped it from happening. And what you're doing is downplaying, acting like, well, if they'd even come around, probably at some point, if it gets pushed far enough, they'll start to suggest the parents are bad people. Well, the father's not father of the years. Typical. And again, which would have nothing to do with the legal reality of the case.
They can stay with their father. That's up to their family to decide where the children go. Children go with their parents. Parents decide where their children go.
Oh, how nice of you to now say that, even though in the past, you guys were both sides separating families. Now, whatever you think about that, the point is it's insane for them to now push this argument that it's like common knowledge. Well, of course we let them decide. No, that's not really been your policy in the past. But now they're trying to push it in because it's not even the reality. They're trying to play the narratives back and forth.
The U.S. deported their mothers who were illegally in America.
Thanks for watching.
So here's a clip from Patrick Henningsen, 21st Century Wire. Important, same point. And I think he makes excellent argument here about the larger idea of this, right? Not just that these are obvious violations of the Constitution, but what does that mean if you're a politician doing this and you're knowingly violating this?
Sacrosanct of all the amendments is the First Amendment. All other amendments, the rights are derived from that ability to have a First Amendment, inalienable rights. Anyone within U.S. jurisdiction, legal or not, is entitled to those rights. And by the way, the President of the United States and his advisors, or whoever has to swear an oath, I'm not sure if anybody does these days, or if they do, whether they actually mean it. If they swear an oath, if you're you're a soldier, you swear this oath, don't you? What is the oath? It's you swear to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. So if you're a U.S. politician and you are undermining or attacking the First Amendment of the United States on behalf of a foreign government, then you're an enemy of the U.S. Constitution. You are a domestic enemy of the U.S. Constitution. If you're a foreign lobby paying for that access to cajole, manipulate, coerce, blackmail, pay off, bribe U.S. officials and office holders in order to undermine the First Amendment so as to eliminate any criticism or opposition to what that foreign country is doing, like Israel, in this case, carrying out a brutal genocide. So anybody involved in that selling out of the U.S. Constitution, that unfortunately is tantamount to treason. Maybe the media, maybe the Democrats should take a look at that. It's like an open goal for the opposition, but they won't take it. They won't take the shot. The Democrats won't take it. AOC won't take it. Bernie certainly won't take it.
Now, don't mistake that for him acting like left versus right. He knows what he's talking about. What he's doing is highlighting the fact that the same thing we point out, which is that if we're going to pretend this is Democrats fighting Republicans or the Republicans fighting the deep state, which are the Democrats, explain why they're not going after the open goal. The obvious reality that they could destroy, or any number of different examples. What they've been doing so far, the Donald Trump, or this current Trump administration has done many things that they could go after. What about the not signing ethics pledges? I brought that up 4 different times before this started and said, if they don't do anything about it, that'll be very telling. And here we are. The supposed people fighting Trump's administration let him slide by without even clearly, because I think they're all involved with the agenda we're discussing. The influence from something else. But his point is important here. Look at how obvious this is. Now, there's people in the media, there's Van Hollen's out there calling it out, but what are they doing about it? There's nothing, there's no impeachment, articles of impeachment. Maybe they'll change, but right now, you need to see what that shows you. I think it's because they're all invested in the same agenda. You can decide for yourself.
Because both parties are bottom out to treason. Maybe the media, maybe the Democrats should take a look at that. It's like an open goal for the opposition, but they won't take it. They won't take the shot. The Democrats won't take it. AOC won't take it. Bernie certainly won't take it. Because both parties are bought and paid for in the United States. Both parties. And that's really sad. Now you're seeing the result of having no opposition is when the nefarious elements get done with the politicians, then they start going for the machinery of government. They start attacking the U.S. Constitution because no one domestically will defend it. And all these so-called conservatives who've been showboating for the last 4 years, fighting the woke, when it comes to actually defending the U.S. Constitution, they ran a mile. Most of them support Israel, so that's that. You know, they're not going to lift a finger. They love deporting their opposition. They don't want any critics. They don't want students protesting on campus.
Important to think about, right? I mean, we're talking about a very important reality here where they are violating what, like, the most sacred part of this, whatever you want to call it, the Constitution, our social agreement, the law. He says, dive into why the First Amendment is considered the cornerstone of all freedoms in the United States. Expose the hypocrisy when it comes to defending the First Amendment and the dangers of having no political opposition. I mean, we're talking about the First Amendment. You look no further than the Anti-Semitism Act, which is still going forward. We'll talk about that in the next show, possibly tomorrow, but we'll see if that ends up. The point is, it's coming. We're going to get into the continuation of that, which undermines the major point, or other highlights the major point, that they don't believe in the First Amendment. That is a direct contradiction to that. Or saying you can't BDS, or any number of things where they're showing you that they are violating your rights for Israel. This just adds to it. And he says, this clip highlights the threats to the U.S. Constitution and the rise of nefarious elements. Are our leaders no longer swearing an oath to protect the Constitution? Well, let's remember, Donald Trump swore himself in without his hand on the Bible. If that, I think that matters, especially as a Christian. But either way, she was standing right next to him with the Bible in her hand, and he chose not to. Maybe it was an accident. I find it a major thing to overlook. I think there might be a reason for that. He adds, constitutional conservatism in America has been completely usurped and destroyed by a foreign lobby and its extremist, quasi-religious, ethno-nationalist ideology. Now, this was Washington Examiner writes, House Republicans vote to hinder Democrats' ability to investigate Trump administration. Now, we've been seeing many examples like this to make it harder for them to hold them in contempt in regard to the judicial system. Now, you can argue this is because they are fighting a corrupt entity like the deep state, and they have to do this to fight off the. Maybe you're right. The point we've always made, Catherine made this right in the beginning. The idea that if you're going to do this the wrong way, like if you're going to do this in a way that ensures that it won't stay or that it will be reversed, then you're not actually doing it. And the point we're making here in this is that in regard to the hindering their ability to investigate, basically, the idea being that they're creating, under the guise of fighting the thing, they're doing the thing. To make it as simple as possible, right? We're saying we got to fight their ability, they're attacking the freedom in this country and Constitution, and so we'll destroy the Constitution to stop them. Yeah, maybe you think that's what makes sense. It's sort of like lesser of evils, isn't it? That's how this goes. But recognize that you shouldn't support this if you've got principles, if you understand what they're doing. They passed a rule Tuesday that hinders Democrats, and really, understand, guys, that's how they frame this, so it makes sense to people that hate Democrats. The right way to read it is, House Republicans passed a rule Tuesday that hinders the ability to use power in the minority to launch investigations into the current administration. That's all it means. You could frame that currently because that's how they want you to look at it, but all this means is, let's say, next time it's reversed. And all of a sudden, the Democrats control the houses and the Republicans are the minority. And now what? Now they can't call out the deep state? It's so stupid how we can't recognize in a larger sense how obvious these things are. Now, Bondi and Hegseth have also ordered to look into how military can be used in domestic operations. No worry there, guys. The violation of the posse comitatus in regard to what they're doing all over in this case, or the border, or now the rollout of the immigration dynamic or the Palantir discussion, all these things are coming together, all under the guise of the same thing, whatever the current thing is that you support right now, left and right. That is insane. And it's happening one by one, and people are allowing it because they don't want to look like they challenge their party. Now, the memo that we talked about yesterday is just important to reiterate. What shows you the direct, this is the important part about this, is it shows you not just we believe we're doing this, maybe the wrong thing for the right reasons, or that this is about trying to, not violate the Constitution, but do in a way that maneuvers legally. This shows you that they knew what they were doing, that they knew that they were violating your rights and did it anyway. That's what this shows you. And this is DOJ memo offers blueprint to Tren de Aragua deportation plan, which for the record, by the way, that overlaps MS-13 too. In most of these things, that's like Tren de Aragua / MS-13. But it says Trump administration officials directed law enforcement nationwide to pursue, and this is a March 14th document, which of course we have for you right here. The Trump administration officials directed law enforcement nationwide to pursue suspected gang members into their homes, or if they think they're in your home, which is what this really is about, in some cases without any sort of warrant. According to the copy of the directive exclusively obtained by USA Today, the directive issued March 14th by Bondi provides the first public view of the specific implementation of the 1798 Alien Enemies Act invoked to deport migrants accused of being members of the gang. A day after the announcement, March 15th, immigration officials apprehended and flew more than 200 Venezuelans to El Salvador. See, the day after, this is what happened. They scooped them up, no process, no warrants. Now remember, when we called that out, what'd they say? Of course we're following the law. Of course we did all of that. People are lying. No, you're lying. They did. Nope. Now they're retroactively finding out, we knew already, like we saw with Ozturk, for example, masks, no identification, no warrants. They didn't care. They think writing this memo somehow gives them they can supersede the Constitution, apparently. Talk about an illegal action, or an insulting, undermining of what the foundational concepts of this country. They can just write a memo and be like, that doesn't matter right now. That's exactly what we've always been fighting. For weeks, news organizations, members of Congress, the courts, and advocates have pressed the administration to provide operational details and evidence to support its claims that they were Tren de Aragua, a new designated foreign terrorist organization. That they designated this right before they did this for the reason of making this feel like it made sense. Wartime Act requires a state entity, so they called them a terrorist organization for that to make, but it's not working. People have very quickly broke it down and said, actually, it's the bottom of the article. I'll hold back for that. But Bruce Fine made the same point that this violates the proper use of this in every way. They don't care. What I was going to say, I just lost a thought that I was going to get into. I'll just keep reading. There's something I was going to jump into up here. But yeah, so it says, press them to provide evidence to support these claims. Oh, well, that's what it was. That ultimately, this whole time, what have they been telling you? That these are confirmed members. From day one, they're confirmed. We know. And then every single one that we got any information for either immediately proved that they were not even remotely that, or that they had nothing to actually prove it. And at best, they had a certain tattoo that they claimed meant that. There's plenty of evidence now showing people that had no tattoos, that have no criminal record, that were here legally. They're just currently in El Salvador, which is still absolutely insane to me. But they said they were absolute, right? Even Garcia, they are absolute. And they just added human trafficking for good measure, even though they're lying about that and everything else. But now this document is showing you that they never even cared to prove it, that they didn't need any of that. They just scooped up people, as they're going to explain for you, if they checked certain boxes, which very clearly shows you what we've always been talking about. It says, the memo was provided to USA Today by the Open Government Group Property of the People, which they obtained through records requests. Legal experts examined the documents that revealed the following. Now, again, here's it is. You can go through it, verify it all for yourself. There's forced I think, there was, here, I'll read through it in here. This is important to read through, though, because it just really does walk you through the internal memo that was given that does not have any real legal standing. Like, they can't just write a memo that's really like a direction that then argues you could just not follow the Constitution. It's crazy. But it says it provides directives to frontline officers apprehending suspected gang members, suggesting officers obtain a warrant of apprehension and removal, quote, as much as practicable. Those administrative warrants are signed by immigration officers, not judges, like criminal warrants. So they're superseding that. That was like the judicial warrant point. They are superseding the entire dynamic of this and just working through their channels. And it says, due to a dynamic nature of law enforcement procedures, officers are free to, quote, apprehend aliens based on their reasonable belief that they meet the definitions that the memo states. Or that the point is, apprehend aliens. Well, how do you even know that they're aliens without any real process to prove that? Now, I guarantee in some cases, like I said before, that they have people that they have, records of, right? My point, though, is that many of them, even those people, though, still require due process, whether they're certain or not. That's how it works, because trust the government should never be the argument. But what we're talking about is people that they're claiming are that we've now proven weren't even actually illegal aliens. So they're just, it's also quite possible that they knew they were doing this. So the only two ways to look at it is this was overly broad and they just didn't really care, or that they were deliberately going for people that they knew weren't allowed, maybe for Israelists, Qatar USA saying, get all of them. I don't know. But it says it purports to grant authority for police to enter suspected alien enemies' residence if circumstances render it impracticable to first obtain a warrant. It's just that is going caveat. Constitution doesn't apply when it's too difficult. The memo told law enforcement that immigrants deemed alien enemies, so whatever they decide is the point, that's how that all works, are not entitled to a hearing, appeal, or judicial review. Flatly wrong, illegal, unconstitutional, as everyone has now ruled, including the Supreme Court. Realize even the Supreme Court, in both cases, 9-0 or the 7-2 follow-up, they said the main point was that they are required to give habeas relief, due process to people in this context. And of course said reasonable time to seek it out. And now they've put down a mandate that it was something like 12 hours they were giving them, knowing that wouldn't give them the process. Now they're going back. It's this tit for tat game that they're playing with people's lives, knowing that they're breaking the law. That's how I see it anyway. So the idea that they literally wrote down not entitled to a hearing, but then argued in many cases they did do that, like Holman and Rubio, we gave them due process. They literally wrote down, we don't have to do that. If we declare them an alien enemy, that sounds like Obama's discussion where they said you're a combatant if you're in the area we're bombing. That's how your government works, guys. And that's the point. They're not different. DOJ did not respond for comment. Administration officials defend the deportations they say are based on internal intelligence and criminal histories of some of the Venezuelans. Of course, they've never proven any of that, never given you a shred of evidence to back up anything other than they were there with the right tattoos or just happened to be there also. Government lawyers say the special designation as a terrorist organization and the Alien Enemies Act affords it a wide berth to respond to national security threat. If that's even what's really happening, and if that's even a real, I mean, all of these are based on these ideas that there's a state actor, that it's a coordinated invasion, and that it's actually a terrorist organization, none of which is actually true. Despite its emergency rulings on the issue, now to be clear, the argument even they're making is that just the amount of illegal immigrants that were allowed in represents an invasion, not necessarily that Tren de Aragua is coordinating an actual invasion as a state actor, which is what it requires to make this legally reality. Nobody cares. Again, where are the Democrats? You could rip this apart right now if you actually wanted to. But that's the point. They're on the same side. But it says, despite its emergency ruling on the issue, Supreme Court has yet to tackle the overall question. Why? Of whether the Alien Enemies Act grants the president the authority to expel alleged members of the gang. Now, to be clear, they kind of did when they said you have to give them due process. So you have to prove the case, which is obviously the static reality. So they did, in a way, already rule on that. But it says, the home under all constitutional law is the most sacred place where you have a right to privacy. According to one of the experts, it says, by this standard, spurious allegations of gang affiliation means the government can knock down your door, which we are seeing. I just played you the clip. I might even still have it. Let me see. From the last show, which is just wild to see, where they were literally kicking in the door of U.S. citizens. I think it was Michigan. Now it looks like I downloaded over it. But in Michigan, they were kicking in doors of U.S. citizens. Why? Because they took part in protest against Israel. It's very easy. Look it up. It's happening all over this country right now. Now it says, quote, I would anticipate this will be challenged in court. It would be a departure from the law. It would allow searches of homes without warrants if they just claim they think there's an alien in there, which we just discussed. Now, Lee, how do you say that? Gelernt? That's a crazy last name. Lee Gelernt, the ACLU's lead counsel in the challenges to use of the Alien Enemies Act, said the DOJ directives run counter to the Constitution's protection from unreasonable search and seizures. Another way to say that more simply is that it's unconstitutional. Quote, the administration's unprecedented use of a wartime authority during peacetime was bad enough. Now we find out the Justice Department was authorizing officers to ignore the most bedrock principle of the Fourth Amendment by authorizing officers to enter homes without a judicial warrant. Judicial warrant is that's the important part. The impact of the assertion that suspects are not entitled to any judicial review has been challenged already in federal courts, and restraining orders for deportations are already active in New York, Texas, Colorado, and yet this is where they point and go, judicial coup. And even though all they're doing is upholding the reality of the Constitution, which in my opinion is their only job. It says on April 7th, a split U.S. Supreme Court, which is weird they say split, seeing as how it was 6-7-2, directed the administration to provide detainees a chance to challenge their case in a proper venue before such removal occurs. In other words, for due process. That's what they ruled, and they're still not doing that. Quote, the documents reveal the Trump administration has authorized every single law enforcement officer in the country, including traffic cops, to engage in immigration roundups explicitly outside due process. Fantastic. Bondi's memo attached a copy of the Alien Enemies Validation Guide that has been scrutinized by immigration attorneys nationwide. It assigns a point system based on a person's court record, not whether they're part of the gang, not whether they're actually illegal here, but whether they have a traffic ticket. Or, which is one of the things we're talking about, which we've already seen used, but it goes based on their court record in the past, but also subjective measures such as phone calls with members of the gang, observations of hand signs, use of graffiti, clothing, tattoos. So the point is, as we already can see, if they have a tattoo that they've somehow, Michael Jordan, or apparently the autism awareness tattoo, which there's apparently 2 people that have been taken because of that. It's an effing rainbow flag. I just don't understand. I mean, it seems like that's almost a just deliberate use. Tattoo, a bull's hat, a skin color. That is apparently enough to get sent to El Salvador right now. Even though you're in many cases here legally in the country. So here's the memo, which I recommend you read for yourself. Here is just a follow-up, same conversation, Daily Beast. Trump, this is a couple extra points. Secret Trump memo tells ICE to break into homes without warrants. Now it says, it stated the ICE can curb the proactive procedures put in place to obtain a warrant. Just a weirdo way to say we don't have to do what the law requires, since they, quote, will not always be realistic or effective in swiftly identifying and removing them. Okay, so what you're saying is, again, the argument of the we can't do it, too much process, which is not a valid argument, if it's not realistic or effective. So if we don't get what we want out of the process, then don't even go for the warrant. Get what we want, and due process later, if ever. Seems like we've heard that before. You know, like when Trump said, due process later about guns in his last administration. I was just playing that, in fact. And the point is, this is important to understand that this has been a repeated concept. That one is about free speech. I don't have it off the side. I won't grab it again. Given the dynamic nature of enforcement operations, officers in the field are authorized to apprehend aliens upon a reasonable belief. That's not how the law works. That alien meets all 4 requirements to be validated. To be validated. You see, they're acting like your assumptive points validate anything. The validation would be the due process where you prove this in a court of law. See, the subjective points will be enough to arrest somebody to then make a case about it. They didn't do any of that. They used the assumptive points to claim he is and remove them forever, apparently for life. It added, this authority includes entering an alien enemy's residence, or as they've already pointed out, even if they suspect it's in your house. Or they just decide to use that claim to get inside for some reason, which they've already done, to make alien enemies act of apprehension where circumstances render it impracticable to first obtain a signed notice and warrant of apprehension and removal. Down here it says, but since then, the administration has been apprehending and deporting immigrants who are not Venezuelans, who have no criminal record. Which is one of the most provable things that we can see in this. And they just go, well, they were here illegally, and many of them weren't. They just don't know what to say. So the point is, they're making this very strong argument that they have to meet all these different things. And it says, I proclaim that all Venezuelans, citizens 14 years of age or older, who are members of the Tren de Aragua gang, not suspected, but are within the United States and are not actually naturalized or lawful permanent residents of the United States, are liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed. So you just heard all that, right? Like the reality of what he said. That's Donald Trump. So what about the people that were here legally, right? Who were, in fact, maybe Khalil had a green card. None of the rest applies. But going back to the people that are Venezuelan, let's say, okay, Venezuelan, certainly age 14. There's plenty of those in this country who are members, but they don't know that. That's the point. They're making the claim without proving it. But then the idea is it very clearly says not actually naturalized or even lawful residents. The El Salvadorian prison is packed now from this 200 plus people they sent with people who are actually here legally. They don't care. And again, even they say, but then they went on to remove people who were not Venezuelan or who were here legally, no criminal record. Finishes by saying the Alien Enemies Act can only be invoked when there is a declared war between the United States and a foreign government or nation, or an invasion or predatory incursion perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the country by a foreign nation. That's what it reads as. You don't just get to make it into what you want, but that's what our government always does. Many have argued that Trump's crackdown on immigration regarding members of the Tren de Aragua gang does not meet the act's requirements of war, invasion, or predatory incursion. It doesn't, pretty flatly. Doesn't matter, apparently. Now, a couple of other points I think are important to highlight, other things that are happening. We just reported this the other day, but I want you to see it because it's really important to hear. ICE invades wrong home. So this really goes back to the due process point, guys. If they never have to verify what they're doing or prove it or even get warrants, which would then require a judge to sign off on it, right? All of this stuff. This is what happens. And they're doing this because they've been given endless leash, apparently, to just do whatever they want with no real, if they just think, if the person might be, grab them anyway. And we keep hearing this. That's the teen, right? Just get him anyway. Now he's in El Salvador. That's a real story. Teen wrongly sent to El Salvador. The people that were there heard the ICE agent say, that's not the one. And the leader said, take him anyway. No tattoos, no criminal record, here legally. He is now in El Salvador. It's a very public case. I mean, it's just, I don't know how anybody who is an honest person can actually pretend like this is okay. Unless you just genuinely hate anybody who's brown, I guess. I don't even know how this makes sense. ICE invades wrong home, steals their life savings, and then leaves. Now, this is the kind of story that they go, that's fake news, Democrat. No, it's very real. It's a very public story. Now, it says in Oklahoma City, which we already went over this briefly, 20 federal immigration agents raided the wrong home. These are U.S. citizens, guys, forcing a woman out of the house with her 3 daughters, not even leaving them enough time to get dressed, then seized their phones, their laptops, their life savings, and then didn't even leave them a business card to find out how to get it back. Didn't identify themselves, didn't present a warrant. We are literally living in times where we are watching the absolute breakdown of everything we ever said was sacred. How do you explain this? How are you okay with that? Again, U.S. citizens, which it shouldn't matter in principle, it's the same point. Search and seizure. So here we are, 20 agents bursting into your home in the middle of the night. You're in your underwear, forced outside. Apparently it was freezing. That's what they were saying. And then took everything. Why? Now realize the point of this is the warrant was for the location, but apparently the people had moved away. And this has all been verified. They rent the house, they moved in. So it shows you this archaic information they're acting on, right? That they're not even verifying this stuff. And then even though they were there and realized it's not the right people, they just decided to steal everything from them anyway. Now, how does that even make sense other than civil asset forfeiture? How does that have to do with immigration at all? It's corrupt. In my opinion, in fact, this doesn't make sense unless there's something else driving this. Again, I would love someone to background research. Who are these people? Were they part of an Israeli protest? Are they on someone's list somewhere? I mean, why would that make sense to anybody? Like, this is a wild overstep even before all of this. Now, it says the woman had only moved into the house 2 weeks earlier after relocating to Oklahoma from Maryland, which is interesting. The armed agents told the woman, identified by local TV station KFOR as Marissa, that they had a search warrant, but the named suspects on the warrant didn't leave the house and weren't connected to anyone in the family. Now realize, according to the family, they never produced the warrant. They said they had a warrant, but they didn't produce it. This is this is chilling, guys. And it says, we just moved in from Maryland. We're citizens. That's what I keep saying. We are citizens, U.S. American citizens. The agents who identify themselves as U.S. Marshals, Immigration, Customs and Enforcement, and FBI agents. Think about that. Didn't he seem to care? Waking the family, forcing them outside in their underwear, ransacking the house, taking their belongings as, quote, evidence. They still haven't gotten it back, by the way. Quote, I told them before they left, I said, you took my phone, but we have no money. I just moved here. We have to feed my children. I'm going to need gas money. I need to be able to get around. Like, how do you just leave me here with nothing like an abandoned dog? You know, for those that, again, it should matter more to you or whatever. The people out there that want to make this make sense, it only matter when it's an American, even though it applies to everybody. American citizens of the United States are being kicked out of their homes in the middle of the night, stolen from by the government with no warrant presented, all because we're fighting gangs, terrorism. Do you realize that this in any other context would be a monumental story? But right now we're buried in all sorts of other criminal activity. These people are getting left on the wayside by the government they probably support. Most Americans, my point, whether left or right, support the government. Now it says they were very dismissive, very rough, very careless. I kept pleading. I kept telling them we weren't criminals. They were treating us like criminals. What happened to get innocent until proven guilty in this country, even though we know that doesn't exist? That's what we pretend, right? This says we were here by ourselves. We didn't do anything. One agent told the family, I know this was a little rough this morning. It says, quote, it was so denigrating that you do all of this to my family, to women, fellow citizens. And it was, quote, a little rough. You literally traumatized me and my daughters for life. We're going to have to get help to get over this somehow. The agents told her that it could take days or months for the family's stuff to be returned and wouldn't even give her a business card. It says it all fits a pattern of cruelty, as they're framing it, but I would agree, from the Trump administration in its efforts to deport as many people as it can. The White House doesn't believe in due process or following the law or even standards of basic decency. The violent raid in Oklahoma City would be wrong even against a family of undocumented immigrants. I agree, let alone U.S. citizens like Marissa and her daughters. Hopefully, she and other victims of the administration's wanton behavior can get restitution. But I mean, how are they feeding themselves right now? They took everything: their phones, their computers, their money. How do they go to work? I mean, everything about this is so incredible. This can't be what we're okay with in this country. I know in my heart that we're better than this. And I know people out there are seeing this and it's scary and it's real, but you need to do something about it. You need to speak out about this. This is not a one-off. This is not the Elon Musk in the White House going, well, we're going to make mistakes. No, that Gaza condom story was one of 100,000 examples of them being facetious, but a lot of examples of them provably lying to you, not making mistakes, knowingly deceiving you. And then when they really get caught going, well, we're going to make mistakes. That's not what this is. This is policy, not byproduct, okay? What they're doing was deliberate by the memo we can see, and now they're going into Americans' homes and just stealing everything, whether that's the one example or not. They're kicking in your door because of narrative, because of excuse. What happened to shall not be infringed? What happened to inalienable? Guys, weren't you just saying that? Melnick points out another example. They were going to send this is a different teenager, by the way. They were going to send a teenager to be imprisoned in El Salvador without a trial because an ICE officer thought a blue and white water pistol was a real gun. He has no criminal record, was attending school, and was in the process of asylum, which whether or not you agree with that, that is the legal process. And he was seeking asylum, and that was if you're in that process, you're not here illegally. And has never gotten into trouble. But it says this is a Guardian article about this. Tracking this case since he was a young man from Venezuela, no tattoos, no criminal record, immigration court date on the books, was sent to Texas from Virginia and almost removed from the country except for the Supreme Court order. So he's not a criminal. He's not a gang member. It's no tattoos, right? So what are we talking about? How is this not as clear as day? He would be in El Salvador for life right now if they hadn't stood up. And yet now we're calling this Democrat activism, even though there were 6 conservative judges that ruled on this. We're lost right now. Some people, anyway. And as I said before, there's already a teen lost in El Salvador forever because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the right skin color. This is actually wild. So Melnick points this out. Venezuelan men who narrowly avoided being imprisoned, like this guy, by the way, right? That's one of the kids in the larger conversation. Now, this specific point, Venezuelan men in this place that were about to be deported, saved by the Supreme Court, spelled out SOS to a Reuters drone camera that was flying over the facility. That's real, guys. Now, that doesn't necessarily prove anything, but it's interesting. These people that are in a group, every second we're finding more examples of people that are not criminals, who are here legally or at the very least seeking asylum, no tattoos, who are being sent to a foreign concentration camp forever. So it's not hard to wrap your mind around the fact that most of them probably are the same. Or some of them, any of them, it matters, guys. And again, should we care to go through the due process we're afforded, we would know for sure in all other cases. But it says buses to the airport were turned around at the last second. They would be in El Salvador right now. Here's the article. April 30th. Migrants held in Texas fear notorious El Salvadorian prison. Now it says, with a Reuters drone flying nearby, 31 men formed a letter in the dirt yard of the facility on Monday. The letter is SOS. 10 days earlier, dozens of Venezuelan detainees at the center were given notices by immigration officials that alleged they were members of the gang and subject to deportation under the Wartime Act, according to the document shown to Reuters. And the court recorded calls and proceedings. The families of 7 detainees interviewed by Reuters said they were not gang members and that they refused to sign the document. Now, of course, the reflexive argument from people that want to support this go, oh, they're just lying. Well, you know how we could know for sure? Same old thing. The problem is that they're denying this, didn't even sign the document. So that's where this comes to play. The government's accusing you of being part of the gang, and you're claiming you're not. The only way you have the opportunity to present your challenge evidence to that would be for due process to happen. Now, if they had been sent already, this would never even be shown. They'd already be in El Salvador forever. Again, if you're watching this, you're following along, and you started this by thinking that this was right. If you're still going, this makes sense, then this is not the show for you. Facts don't matter because it's obvious that what this is a violation. Even if you agree that they should be deported in a normal sense, this is wrong. And there are people that are being sent to a prison for life who are not criminals and not breaking the law, even in this country, because they're probably lying. Nevertheless, hours later on Friday, April 18th, they were loaded onto a bus bound for the airport to take them to El Salvador. Before the they basically stepped up and stopped this Supreme Court ruling and human rights groups that are pushing this in their face that got this to be paused. The buses were turned around at the last second. Think how close that is. Children, teenagers. That night, the Supreme Court temporarily blocked their deportations. The Department of Homeland Security declined to comment on that deportation, halted. It was a reprieve for the group of Venezuelans detained at this location who still face being potentially sent to CCOT, the notorious, the concentration camp in El Salvador that Trump's paying to send all sorts of people there. Now it says denied access to the facility at ICE. Reuters flew a small plane over the center last week, as well as the drone, which is what you saw. Two of the people one of them's 29 or 24, one of them's 19. Now it says hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans have come to the United States over the past few years fleeing economic collapse, which is what the U.S. has been engineering, and what critics call an authoritarian crackdown under Maduro. Well, I disagree with the general framing of that. I don't think any government's really on your side, but overall, that's irrelevant. The point is, whatever it is, and it's clear the U.S. government's manufacturing that, even if he is a tyrant, is that is what drove a lot of people into this country. And let's not forget, Marco Rubio himself was responsible for saying, "Come on," I showed his tweets on the show before. Right in this time frame, was going, "Come into the United States, we'll protect you." Many of them came and then got arrested. That happened back then. But now the point is that they are here under the guise that they're going to be allowed to flee from what you're pointing to as for asylum. And now those people are being yanked and sent to a foreign prison. I mean, think about how grotesque that is to claim that you're going to save them from the group that you're destroying and then use them in the next agenda and send them to a foreign prison for life. People that are just regular Venezuelans fleeing from whatever you claim is happening. And yet you're calling them terrorists now. That's the promises of the U.S. government. Now it says under the administration of Joe Biden, many were actually given some of that temporary protection. And now they're trying to revoke it. The same point in a different way. Just that was a legal a contract that was entered into saying we will protect you from X, Y, and Z. They've been here for years. They've made their lives. And Trump just goes, never mind. Now it's not unique to Trump and Biden. It's just the game that's played with this government for obvious reasons. Now it says in one recent video call, the older one, 24-year-old Milan, told his wife that they hadn't been given much food, and he tried to sleep more so that he wouldn't realize how hungry he was, something that other detainees also said. Now, maybe you don't care about that because you convince yourself they're all terrorists, even though we can prove they're not. It just shows you a problem here. Now, this very much overlaps with the mindset of what we're seeing in the world today. The spokesperson for the location, the corporation that runs this, so a for-profit prison, which is just disgusting, which runs the facility, said all detainees housed receive meals based on a menu that's been approved by a certified dietitian, ensuring recommended daily caloric intake is met. Doesn't that seem comparable to what Gaffe and the rest were saying, that we're making sure that they're getting the bare minimum of calories? Clearly seems like a similar concept. Now, I can't stop seeing these overlaps to the way they're treating these people. If you don't recognize Israel's hand in all this as they're pointing to groups that are giving them lists, I don't think you want to see it. That stuff just stands out to me as almost like they're trying to punish these people for something else. Several of the men wanted to know how it was possible for them to be classified as alien enemies when they were not gang members and had committed no crime. Seems like a valid question. They must be under the illusion they somehow have a process that will be given to them, that they might have a day in court. Morons, right? Stupid aliens don't even know the rights of the country. Oh, no, they do actually know the rights. They're not being given those rights. If you don't have a criminal record in the 3 countries in which I have lived in, how are they going to send me to El Salvador? One of the men in the recording asked. Reuters wasn't immediately able to establish his identity. The point is, he's never been there. He's not El Salvadorian, and he has no criminal record anywhere he's ever been. Now you're going to send him to El Salvadorian prison? Several of the men had court hearings in their immigration cases that were scheduled, and now they don't get to use them. So the point is, they were in the process of adhering with the law. So many of these people are coming to the gates and saying, I want to be an American citizen. Talk about that American dream, right? And in the process of seeking it, they got the wrong skin color. Trump sweeps in and sends them to a foreign prison forever. Milan has been in a pending asylum case. So one of them has immigration cases in regard to citizenship. One has an asylum case. These things are all legal realities, but apparently not anymore. On top of that, Melnick reports this was on the 30th today. 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump was stopped from sending more people to be imprisoned in El Salvador. Now we're learning who they were. And the stories are outrageous. Now, we went into one part of it. One guy was accused of being Tren de Aragua because of his tattoos, which include Pikachu, Toad, and Patrick from SpongeBob. All of this stuff is so easy to prove, and it's almost embarrassing at this point, but it's so real. Mother Jones, our investigation, and this is the one we were talking about the other day. Based on first-hand accounts from ICE detainees in Texas, reveals how Venezuelans were nearly removed from the country under this act because of allegations, many of which we can prove aren't true. Now, here's one. This case is interesting because this is one of the ones we were following. This is a guy that was overlapped with Khalil, was one of these people at Columbia who was part of the protest and everything. No criminal record, other than allegations because he supports Palestine, that therefore he is a terrorist. That's the best they can do, which is not true. They had to release him. Now, this is important. This, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of what happens when they have to go through due process. They lose, which is exactly why they are fighting tooth and nail to not have to do that anywhere else. Now, it says a federal judge in Vermont ordered the release on Wednesday of Mohsen Mahdi, a Columbia University student who was arrested 2 weeks ago by ICE after he went to his immigration. I think it was immigration meeting, which is interesting. So they allowed him. I think that's the one, if I remember this correctly. We'll read through it. The point is, he was going to. They kind of lulled him into this, and they arrested him. He didn't break the law. Now it says, quote, 2 weeks of detention so far. 2 weeks in detention with no crime, no charge, no allegation. It's just insane. 2 weeks of detention so far demonstrate great harm to a person who has been charged with no crime. U.S. District Judge Jeffrey Crawford said at a hearing Wednesday, Mr. Mahdi, I order you released, he says. Now, it says Judge Crawford, who ruled to release me, this is Mahdi speaking. Judge Crawford, who ruled to release me against all of the heinous accusations, horrible acts, chills of speech, First Amendment violations. He had made a very brave decision to let me out. And this is what justice is. And for anybody who's doubting justice, this is a light of hope, a hope and faith in the justice system in America. Now, I don't have as much hope that it's going to go that direction, but he's right. It is an example of how the system appropriately works. And he says for President Trump and his cabinet, I am not afraid of you, which probably is not going to be in his interest. I'm willing to bet you of any group we're talking about right now, they would hate that and will go after him because he said that, which just shows you the kind of petty, childish, juvenile nature of all this, but yet with people that have tremendous power, which is terrifying. But we'll see what happens. This will be a case to follow because what they've done so far is essentially prove that he's not what they claimed he was, and that's why he's been released. So as this goes forward, we'll see how this plays out. It says Mahdi, who co-founded a university organization called the Palestinian Student Union, and with detained Columbia student Mohammed Khalil, was born and raised in a refugee camp in the West Bank. And now you see why it matters so much. Before moving to 2014 to the United States, where he has been a legal resident for 10 years. No criminal activity, no tattoos, no support for Hamas, none of the claims they're making. He simply supports people fighting against genocide. Mahdi, who is expected to graduate from Columbia next month, which I'm sure they'll try to stop, was arrested at a U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services office in Vermont, where he was taking his last steps in the process to become a U.S. citizen. I mean, imagine that, guys. You're literally going through the right steps to be the thing they claim you're not, and they arrest you right before you can get that to happen, lulling you into the meeting where you're doing that and grabbing you at the meeting. I mean, it's like a, I don't want to say a violation of this, they're abusing the things they claim they hold sacred. Judge Crawford noted at Wednesday's hearing that Mahdi received letters of support, this is important as well, from over 90 community members, including members of the Jewish community, who have, quote, who have in consistent pattern described him as peaceful. Same thing about Khalil. This is why they're failing all this, guys, because this is counter to the obvious reality and the facts, just whatever Israel wants, apparently. His lawyers believe that, like Khalil, he's being targeted by the Trump administration under Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 273A4CI, which assert that the Secretary of State can deem a person deportable if they have reasonable ground to believe that the person's presence or activities in the U.S. could have adverse foreign policy consequences. My God, that could literally mean anybody for any reason whatsoever because they say so. That's the point. Now, here is where Mayberry versus Madison is important. Supreme Court ruling, I think 1803, the reality being is if it's repugnant to the Constitution, no matter how many people agree with it, it is null and void. So here, just because they passed this does not therefore mean that it is that's constitutional or legal. The reality is that's a contradiction to the reality of the Constitution. Of course, they obviously have. You can't just randomly choose to do that because you claim their ideas are suddenly a problem, which is what it says. They're doing that, though, and pretending like it's somehow not a direct violation of the Constitution, but because it is, and you can prove it, It's not legally valid, is the point. At Columbia, Mahdi was an outspoken critic of Israel's military campaign in Gaza, and that is why this is happening. My opinion anyway, but I think it's quite obvious. Quote, he's being detained based solely on his First Amendment rights. His speech. This is one of his attorneys speaking. That's a violation of the law. That's a violation of the Constitution. And he should be released immediately as a result of the detention. There's just no question there, guys. It's wild. Now, I forgot my note here. Oh, yeah, just like I already made. And this is why due process is important, guys. I mean, the reality is that if this hadn't happened, you would never, I'm going to make sure I didn't actually misread that. I mean, that's the point they made at the beginning. I assumed it was the same one. Oh, well, that's okay. I'm actually glad I reread this. So the first point was obviously like, that's why this whole process is important. But as I wrote to myself, my own note, this is why they avoid due process. They know they'll lose. But I kind of did say at the beginning, but think about that, right? They clearly know that if they go through this, the evidence they don't have will be shown to be faulty unless they can manipulate the court process, which is what they're trying to do, which is what we'll end with here. The chilling threats to judges to hope they just blindly rule in your favor. Very American, right? Very all in line with the Constitution. The scary part, though, they know if they go through that process that this won't work, so they're trying to create the momentum to argue we don't need to. Now, Melnick points out, April 22nd, Josh Marshall says, purported ICE agents raid a courthouse in Charlottesville in plain clothes without badges, IDs, or warrants. Cart off 2 men without explanation. One of the 3 men was masked, and the detainees were ushered into an unmarked van. And I guess we assume that's ICE, right? For all we know, that was a kidnapping. I mean, this is why this stuff matters. But it's everywhere you look right now because of the memo we already know exists. So they're literally pretending their memo gives them the right to just violate constitutional rights of everybody, including Americans. But the principle's the same regardless. Melnick says these kind of very public courthouse arrests are going to send the message to undocumented immigrants. I would argue to any immigrants, seeing as how we can prove that people who actually have valid visas are actually validly going through the process are being targeted almost. So now they're going to be hiding. And I think let me read the sentence, and then I'll give you this thought that I think this is deliberate. It's to send the message to undocumented immigrants not to show up to court. That is a bad idea, he says. As a society, we want to encourage people to attend their hearings in court. This does the opposite. Now, here's the point. That's one first way to look at it. The second is, like I said, there's people that already know, like we do, that they're doing this to people that are legally here. So now you're going to have immigrants that are afraid to be taken advantage of that don't show up to court hearings they're required to show up to. Then guess what happens? Then they use that lack of showing up to deport them anyway. I'm telling you guys that this is a coordinated thing using old traffic tickets to argue that it's a violation. I mean, it's everywhere you look. They're just grabbing people for whether they're legally applicable or not. Removing visas hours before they go get them and then claiming that the visa is invalid and that's why they get removed. It's just gross. Everywhere you look, this is happening. Now, this is the New York Times. Wisconsin judge arrest what we know. Now, this is interesting because, look, like I briefly went over yesterday, this is incredible the way they're doing this. But you could clearly argue that what she did was, borderline. I mean, you could argue it's illegal. I mean, I think what's hard, it comes down to intent. And it does seem like she was frustrated about it and clearly took action that was meant to circumvent what they were doing. Now, is that justifiable to arrest a judge and perp walk her out the street and send, when ultimately now it's released and waiting for a hearing, or was that deliberately meant to instill fear that we're going to go after everybody? Now let's read through it. You can decide for yourself, because what's interesting about this is they are breaking the law, guys, from a judge's perspective in 100 different ways. And so for her to try to circumvent that, I would argue is still wrong, because that's if you play that game, it's tit for tat, and you end up doing the same thing. That's what our government does every day. Oh, they did it first. Oh, the Democrats started it. Well, then you're just as stupid and bad. Stand by your principles, right? Don't do what they do because they started it. That's childish. So my point is that I think what she did here was it was wrong. I mean, it was circumventing the current legal reality. I guess, see, it's hard to say because they're breaking the law, but from her perspective, to do that, like I said, would just be adding to the problem. That's the best way to say it. Nonetheless, the way that they responded is very chilling. FBI agents arrested on Friday and a Milwaukee judge accused of obstructing justice. Now, that's also the point, accused, by directing an unwanted immigrant out of a courtroom through a side door while federal immigration agents waited in the hallway to arrest him. But the U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi defends the move, saying Judge Dugan's arrest sent a strong message. Well, they're basically telling you it's about threat. It's sending a message. If you don't do what we say, we're going to go after you. But she goes, to judges, the Trump administration will prosecute them if they obstruct justice by escorting a criminal defendant out the back door. Now, even that is taking liberties with this. Clearly, it seems that she kind of directed her out that door, but did not walk her out the door and did not harbor anybody. So it seems they're trying to make this bombastic, maybe even knowing that it won't actually stick, but just to send the chilling message, which is what they do. I mean, they don't need to embellish these things. They could just say that she directly tried to circumvent what she knew we were going to do. But you see, that's not you could argue that would not necessitate the kind of action they took. So they have to embellish it, right? But it says, and after the arrest, the FBI director, Kash Patel, posted a photo of her handcuffs on X, adding, no one is above the law, which is so crazy to me because they're now using this to point to everything else too, which I'll show you at the end, which is exactly the point. And I don't really think they recognize what they're doing there. The whole point of all of this is that no one's above the law, right? And so what the current administration is doing is clearly putting themselves above the law, saying that because of this and because of that, we can just say that this doesn't apply, warrants aren't there. They're the best example everywhere. And now pointing at the judges trying, in many cases, to hold them accountable as the ones trying to stop what's legally, it's insane. And so when they come out and say no one's above the law, as you arrest a judge in a circumstance that's pretty borderline, it's almost like they're making everyone's point for them. But what they want is just to convince the people out there that will blindly support them that the judges are trying to break the law and we're just upholding the law, even if she is breaking the law, which it's a question to be asked how this went down. I'll read more and you can decide for yourself. But clearly the Trump administration is doing it in bombastic ways. I wouldn't say no more or less than previous. I think right now is a special circumstance. But if it was Biden that was here, I think he'd be doing the same thing. That's my point. But it says on April 18th, 6 federal officers arrived at the Milwaukee County Courthouse to arrest Eduardo Flores Ruiz, a Mexican national who was there for a hearing on battery charges. Before the hearing, a lawyer, told Judge Dugan that agents from ICE were outside her courtroom, according to a criminal complaint against her. Now, so right there, you could argue that they lied about that. Like, you'll see this process come out. I don't think it's the case. I think this is pretty clear. But my point is that let's recognize how easy it is to take at face value what the authority tells you, despite how often, even just today, we've proven they've been caught lying. But it says she called the situation absurd and left the bench. So the process is that she was told she got up and walked out to say something to them. And says Judge Dugan then spoke to the federal agents, telling them they needed a judicial warrant and to speak with the chief judge of the Milwaukee County. Now, so in her mind, and this is not to justify it, just to understand why she took the action, she's of the mind that they're breaking the law, or at the very least skirting the constitutional reality. So if you want to try to understand why she might have done this, that would probably be why. Or maybe she hates Trump. So that's very likely as well. But nonetheless, the way that this was handled and the way that they're embellishing it shows you something else. It says one of the officers talked to the chief judge, Carl Ashley, who told the officer that there was a policy in the works about where in the courthouse they could arrest people. But he emphasized that such action should not take place in courtrooms or other private locations. Chief Judge Ashley told the agent that hallways were areas where an arrest could be made. As Mr. Flores Ruiz and his lawyer left the courtroom, Judge Dugan told them, wait, come with me, according to the courtroom deputy who overheard it. So I would argue that is probably pretty trustworthy, but question everything. The deputy saw her usher them through a door that leads to a non-public area of the courthouse. Now, to be clear about that, that means that she went up and said, come over here and walked them, a few more feet to the door and let him out the door. Now, yeah, you could argue that that's ushering or that in that process she was harboring them, but we all know that's a pretty broad stretch of what that was. Doesn't change the fact that what she did does seem to be trying to circumvent that. But it says agents then saw Mr. Flores Ruiz and his lawyer in a public hallway, and one agent entered an elevator and with them and watched them leave the building, but did not immediately make the arrest, the complaint said. Other agents then arrested him on the street. Okay, so at the end of the day, they got him anyway. Which doesn't change the fact that you shouldn't, discuss and call it out if you think the law was broken there. But the argument comes down to this idea that she's harboring something that they arrested anyway. That doesn't even make sense. This is my point about the way that they're embellishing this. A week later, FBI agents arrested her. A week later at the courthouse. Why? because they're trying to clearly send a message. They could have said, come in. They could have gone to her house. They went there for a reason. And then literally perp walked her through the front door in handcuffs. She's not a violent criminal. Like, this was an overstep in a lot of ways, but it's no different than them kicking in non-violent crimes indoors, full SWAT gear, and arresting people in the same way. That's police state we live in today, even more now than ever. Now, it says she was charged with obstructing immigration officers and concealing somebody to prevent an arrest. Now, in other contexts, they've literally, I think it was Bondi used the term harboring a criminal or something like that. Craig Mastantano, a lawyer who represented Judge Dugan at her brief court appearance as a defendant on Friday, called her arrest highly unusual, noting that federal law enforcement officers could have first contacted her for questioning or asked her to turn herself in. Now, I'm not really of the one that's going to, require to show reverence because of your position. That should be equally applied to everybody. But that's also the same point in reverse, is this is clearly not the equal application of this. They're going, it's like the way they're going after Tesla people or the one that stole her purse. They're going wildly over the top to make a statement showing you how personal it is, how subjective it is. But the point is either way, because there's also arguments being made that somehow they shouldn't have done this because it's undermines the court. I don't care about that. Like, if it undermines the reality of all this, that's the fault of the judge and whatever else. My point is it should be applied equally. And neither side of that seems to be actually what's happening. Judge Dugan, 65, spent much of her career providing legal services to poor people, specializing in housing, public benefits. After her court appearance, which you could argue that would mean maybe she's more, willing to help somebody who she sees as being persecuted. But it says after her court appearance on Friday, Judge Dugan was released on her own recognizance. Her legal team vowed to contest the charges. A preliminary hearing is scheduled for May 15th. So we'll find out more. On May 15th, we'll find out more information. I'm willing to bet you this goes pretty much nowhere. They'll try. I bet you they're going to try to put her in prison, I would argue. But I bet you because the way this went down, it's very difficult to prove intent in regard to trying to circumvent that, other than, as people have already argued, maybe she just was trying to avoid the commotion right out front the court, which does make sense. Now, look, my gut tells me she was very clearly trying to help them avoid what was going to happen. Maybe because she felt that it was wrong. In many cases, you can prove that it is illegal, but doesn't change the fact that what she did would be considered, what's the best word for it? It's, you could argue illegal, but I feel like that's a bit harsh in the reality of what we're talking about. That ultimately she is trying to circumvent something that you can argue in many ways is already breaking the law. So it changes this. It's nuance. But we'll see how it goes forward. I find it a very interesting case. And then, and this last part was might affect judges' behavior. I think that's the bottom of the article. I just skipped it or missed it. That's what they're arguing, right? It appeared designed to make judges afraid to take any position out of step with the Trump administration. I think that's pretty obvious. Now, I think this one, there are a few points I'll add to this, and we're pretty much done. How long are we today? Oh, man. How come nobody's telling me I haven't been showing this the whole time? I guess it's only been me reading, right? That's too bad. Yeah, I guess I've just been reading it, so I guess it doesn't really matter. Usually guys let me know in the chat. So this was what I had up, at least, and maybe I pulled it down in accident. Either way, it's all it was me reading the article. But so that's where it was, in case you didn't see it. Wisconsin judge arrest, what we now know from the New York Times. And then this is where we're at now. And this is the article from the 29th I was briefly talking about yesterday. Some overlap, but ultimately the points I think are relevant here are earlier this month, ICE arrested her. Same conversation, administrative warrant. An administrative warrant is not signed by a judge and does not allow agents to enter private spaces to make an arrest like a judicial warrant would. While the agent sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, Dugan said or told Flores Ruiz and his attorney to use the side door. The door exit into the same public hallway, and one agent rode the same elevator down. They got him anyways, the point. But last week, FBI agents appeared at the courthouse to arrest her. She's been charged with obstructing justice and harboring an individual. The first one, you could argue that, but harboring, it's a stretch. Both felonies. Soon after her arrest and before she made her initial appearance in front of a judge, Donald Trump, President Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi and Patel were discussing the case on social media and television, accusing Dugan of being deranged. Okay, I'm glad I remembered to talk about this. So this is what we're getting at. This is getting insane in a totally different way. So what they do is, in many ways, you could argue this is essentially how are you going to go to court after the president, who is part of this, or the agency involved are literally going on news organizations and going, she's insane, she's deranged, she's a criminal. Don't you think that's going to influence the case and the outcome of the ruling? Now, whether it goes to a jury or not is different, but the point is nonetheless the same, is that you're tainting the perception of all of this and saying that she's deranged. And it's a very interesting conversation. I think there's a point to be made about all of that. Bondi said on Fox News Friday that the charges were filed against Duggan to show the administration was willing to go after even judges. And it says, from the beginning, the case displayed many missteps in an effort to show force and draw attention. It looks like the prosecutors are completely, this is one of their opinions, was completely co-opted in Trump world and aren't really using very good judgment. You should look at the facts and law, and there's just no chance they'll be able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Judge Duggan was corruptly intending to avoid a government subpoena. That's my point. That you could argue that there clearly seems to be something, but they're going to give it an argument like, well, we didn't want it to be didn't want them to be arrested in front of the courtroom, so we went out the different door. And you can't prove they're lying. So they know this. But it says, or that she was harboring a fugitive. So whether it, again, seems that she probably was doing that in a court of law, beyond a reasonable doubt is what's necessary. And it says, during the initial arrest, he questions why the DEA or FBI agents are appearing at the courthouse for immigration enforcement actions and why so many agents were even needed to do this for an administrative warrant. They had DEA, FBI, and everybody for one person who's not, they're trying to present this in very clear ways for a response and for hopefully chilling effects so people don't speak up. I think I'll leave it there, General, but to kind of wrap this up, David Icke highlighted another example. This is that judge. This is the one being arrested for Duggan. And this is what David Icke said. Trump regime arresting judges. Reading the comments to the post below is like watching turkeys voting for Christmas. Amazing how many support fascism until it applies to them. This is not about a migrant and a single judge. It is about neutering the judiciary as Trump has neutered Capitol Hill. So the separation of power is deleted to become a dictatorship. It's one way to look at it for sure. And of course, this is Stephen Miller making the same point. Well, first, this is Amy Klobuchar, again, the Democrat side going, this is wrong. So they go, well, if they say it, it must be right. Basic, ridiculous, childish, bottom of the barrel, reverse psychology. But she goes, who knows if that's the design or not. That's how I look at it mostly. She says it's not normal. The administration's arrest of a sitting judge in Wisconsin is a drastic move that threatens the rule of law. While we don't have all the details, this is a grave step that undermines our system of checks and balances. Not really getting into the actual arguments. That's I question these things are valid, or genuine. It's meant to give you that fake left-right discussion, usually on false points. Miller steps in using it like you'd expect and says, no one is above the law. My point from before is the same. You're making our point for us, Miller, as you literally get caught breaking the law everywhere. And whether this is the one example you could use to actually somewhat be seen as doing what is within the law, every other example of what you're doing is literally violating the law in the most bombastic ways we've ever seen. And that's what your argument is? Just to jump to this, Caroline Leavitt refuses to rule out the arrest of Supreme Court judges. You see what they're doing here? And they're hoping, I think, this pushes back on what they're doing. And he goes, a judge harbored and concealed a criminal alien. They can't, if you could frame this in ways that are exactly what happened, and it would still probably work for you. But just like every other Zionist propagandist, they have to make it cartoonish. Harbored? Really? Look up the definition. Or the idea of criminal alien? No, that's not the reality of the circumstance. What they're doing is insane. And people are buying it, like Trump's tattoo discussion. And then we get stuff like this. Everyone and by the way, guess this is MJ Truth Ultra, the one that shared the original image of his knuckles, making the claim that that's what proved his case, with now inadvertently disproving Trump's allegation. I'm sure they're not talking about that. Cat Turd says, "Oh my God, they're arresting judges." Like that's not an important thing. Look, even if they broke the law, arresting judges is a major important step, or rather, news story. It's huge. For them to downplay it, it's just so funny. These people are such ridiculous. Maybe we'll find out later they're not even real. I don't think that. I think they're just people that are going along to get along, don't care that they're childish and cartoonish every day, or blindly support somebody they've never even met. But it says the party who arrested president over fake political reasons. Do you really think that's even a logical thing to say? So it doesn't matter that they're doing the same thing because you did it first? Yes, you're a 6-year-old. Like every other time. Well, the Democrats started it. Like, it's just so stupid. Like, these people are children. And same things, you know, they're posting all these. No one's above the law that Joe Biden said or Democrats said. Okay. Well, it stands no matter who says it, right? I mean, it's weird to think that is somehow making their point. Like every Democrat is, I mean, guys, this is a crazy step. And if the best they can do is act like the Democrats were lying about it before, it shows you how weak their argument is. And as always, this is why I think people are seeing it. And you know, when she was asked, she didn't say it that she would, but she didn't rule out when asked specifically, she made the bottom line point that nothing's off the table as they always do. So you can make that a nothing answer. I think it's important to see that this is about building the argument, or rather the understanding that you could be next, like they do with you, like they do with everybody. And what does that lead to? Does that bring us to a place where we're more free, more liberty, where constitutional rights are upheld? Or does that create a very problematic circumstance where they can do whatever they want and no one's willing to call it out? Which, by the way, is pretty much exactly where we are right now. Not nobody in the context of people in the media, and rather independent media, but in the power structure. As I think it was Patrick Henningsen said, I mean, they've neutered DC. I mean, it's Capitol Hill. It's gone. No one's pushing back. Not even the Democrats, who they want you to believe are the deep state fighting Trump. But no, they don't say a word about this stuff in the context of real legal action or something that's the full picture that could actually change something. You get the Amy Klobuchar, you know, part stories that are really just designed to keep the two-party illusion divided. Either way, all of this is important, as you damn well know, and everybody out there knows. What's happening right now is monumental. It's tectonic, guys. We're watching these things shift in ways that I don't think we'll ever be able to come back from if we don't stop it as soon as we can. And that's not just about the technocratic direction. It's about the way that they're setting precedents, even if just in the minds of people that support them, that allow them to, I mean, even float the idea of sending Americans to foreign prisons, guys. I mean, we must be able to recognize how real this is. So I will leave you with a clip that, you know, makes that point since we ended with it. Thank you for tuning in today, guys. Really trying to, you know, multiple things, obviously, trying to refocus a little bit on things, you know, despite, as I still find them to be very important with what's going on just, you know, what's the factual reporting of what's going on, and stop letting the distractions of the day draw into the conversation, again, as much as I do think they're important today, and get back to just getting, you know, more work out as possible. Now, the more you guys can support TLAV in general, the more it'll make that easy. And, you know, as opposed to me trying to find other ways to generate revenue, you know, to keep this going and allow myself the time to be here as much as possible, or to bring on more writers and keep the clips going. But as I said, regardless of any of that, I'm going to keep doing this because I believe in it. I believe in you. So if you believe in us, show us that. I love you guys. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
In some respects, it's just as bad now, the authoritarianism that is coming, Gerald. I am really, really fearful for the President of the United States of America to suggest, as he did on Air Force One on Sunday night, that American citizens could be deported. Yep. For his press secretary to say, we're looking into a way to see if this is legal. We don't know if it's legal or not. A, is terrifying. B, betrays such a profound ignorance of first principles to which he is sworn. He is sworn to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and to enforce federal law.
You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized Americans?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What do you think? There's a special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have bad ones too.
Profoundly un-American, utterly unconstitutional, and I'm sorry to say, is coming.